Hello, Blenders, and welcome to episode number 177 of Real Blend, a podcast that believes two things. Die Hard is a Christmas movie, and Don't Breathe is a Thanksgiving movie. My name is Sean O'Connell, the managing editor here at Cinema Blend, joined as always... Oh, let me do this week's show. I'm sorry. The theatrical windows are going to be narrowing 45 days with a major studio and a major theater chain. We'll explain what that means. Jennifer Hudson's new film, Respect, is going to be hitting theaters, and director Shawn Levy is going to be joining us to talk Free Guy. And by us, I mean Kevin McCarthy, Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. Hi, Kev.
Sean, good to see you. Gabriel, good to see you. I know you're going to introduce Gabe here shortly, but I'm very, very excited about our Shawn Levy interview. I think people are going to be really excited. I had a Real Blend fan reach out to me on Instagram a couple weeks ago asking if we were going to have him on, and I'm like, yes, we're going to have him on. His name is Morgan Brown, is the Real Blend listener who reached out to me, and so shout out to him, and here's the episode you're going to have Shawn Levy on, so enjoy. In the third chair is Gabe Kovach. Hi, Gabe. How are you?
I'm good. I'm filling in for old Jake because he's on assignment. I had a pretty sweet assignment, actually.
Also, you are tanned, rested, and ready from your vacation.
I am, yeah. So if I miss a step...
That's a really good combination of words.
It is.
It is good.
You want to be at least one of all of those things. We'll talk about Jake's assignment later because I think he's doing a video clip for us.
Yes.
From where he is. Did he get that to you already?
No, he hasn't, but he should. So.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to some housekeeping real fast before we dive into this week's show, which is really, really busy. If you're watching us on YouTube, hello. Thank you for joining us. You guys can tune into a visual element of the show every single week. While you're here, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. So as soon as Gabe gets the video posted to YouTube, you guys can figure out when to come over and watch the show. For our audio listeners, if you want to join us in video form, go to youtube.com/RealBlendPodcast. Of course, we are available every place that you get your audio podcast needs met. And we want you guys to know that we have the premium show, which we promote every single week. And this week in particular, we did a segment that we normally do on the main show, but we kind of just ran out of time because we usually do it around the time that we sat down and spoke with Quentin Tarantino instead. And that is the best of the year so far. So on this most recent premium episode, Jake and Kevin and myself all picked our top 3 favorite movies so far. Not in any kind of order. I think Kevin and I did an order. Jake wanted to do an alphabetical because
Jake went alphabetical. Yes.
Yeah, he's very. He takes his list very, very seriously. So, and then I picked up a couple of great recommendations based on what we were talking about. There's definitely some films that I want to dive deeper into, including one that we're going to talk about in This Week in Movies. So if you want to get the premium, it's cinemablend.com/RealBlendPremium. Make sure you check that out. What's up, Kev?
Sean, can you rewind a couple sentences and just kind of repeat what you just said again? Because you essentially said we couldn't do a segment on our show
right,
because we were too busy talking to Quentin Tarantino in Los Angeles at his movie theater. And Sean was referring to the idea that we normally do a mid-year best of. And a funny story about that is the first time we ever interviewed Quentin Tarantino, we've said this before, when he walked in the room, this was for the first interview we did with him for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he walked in the room rehashing lines from our mid-year best of movies. And that one happened to be Spider-Man Far From Home. And it was really cool to get his perspective on that. So it's kind of been like a mid-year thing for the show. But this time, as Sean mentioned, we were too busy with Quentin Tarantino to have done that on the real show. So
that first interview we got with him,
make sure you reiterated that.
The first one we got with him was only 20 minutes, though. That's like a blip on the radar. I hate to even say that.
That's kind of crazy, yeah.
Because the other ones have been over 2 hours now at this point.
Well, the other ones are like you get a half hour in and then they really start getting good kind of vibes.
Exactly. Which is kind of how I feel about everybody that we get. I wish we had that amount of time with all the people, especially Shawn Levy this week. You'll see.
Maybe someday.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a watch
Shawn Levy's an amazing interview.
He is. It's really great. Let's get to him in a minute. We're having a watch party. I want everybody to know about this. On Monday, August 30th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, the Real Blend guys, in addition to a bunch of people from over at Cinema Blend, are going to be doing a live tweet watch of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the very first Indiana Jones film. Some would argue the best Indiana Jones film. You can play along using hashtag Cinema Blend Movie Club. We'll continue to plug that on our socials and get people excited to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark with us. And finally, last item before we dive into the show proper, we dropped a bonus episode a little bit earlier this week, which you guys can find on YouTube or also wherever you get your audio podcast needs met. It is the creative team behind Don't Breathe 2, which we're going to review a little bit later on in the show. It's Fede Alvarez, the producer, and then his director and co-writer, Rodo Se Aguez, and they were terrific. Gave a really great interview, and you can see that separately. That one kind of went off the rails a little bit, like right off the bat.
In a great way.
Yeah, in a really good way.
We earned our E on that one. So if you ever see like an E next to our podcast, that means it's explicit. And this one's like E squared or E cubed.
I think it's a good example of when we get they were fantastic, but when we get people in the middle of a junket day or towards the end of a junket day, there's like a level of they're just kind of exhausted or whatever, like some sort of wall comes down. They're much more kind of playful or excitable or you know, kind of having fun whenever we bring that energy. And so I think that's a lot what this one felt like. It was a lot of fun.
For a tease, just anybody who's listening to this now, there is a moment in that interview, I think it's after the first question, or second question, where Fede Alvarez essentially says something that just kind of like took us all off guard, like just dropped this like massive line. I mean, it's a famous quote from The Exorcist, but I will tell you that it all took us off guard because we don't normally hear that in an interview. Normally someone would edit themselves, but he just went all out. So the interview from that point forward is just F-bomb, F-bomb, F-bomb. It's awesome.
He was uncensored, so you guys can find that again.
He didn't breathe. He just kept cursing.
All right.
Let's get to the weekly poll. And this one I'm going to have to throw to Kevin because
Sean, sorry, before we get to the weekly poll, I don't think you mentioned, keep an eye out this weekend on the YouTube channel for a spoiler clip from that interview. It didn't make the episode that already went up. It was just a bit of spoilers, so we're saving that for after the movie comes out. So just keep an eye. It'll only be on our YouTube channel. Check the description for how to find us. If you're on YouTube, just subscribe, stay tuned here, and it should pop up over the weekend. A fun little clip about the film.
So the weekly poll that we asked had to do with the fact that last week after we recorded, Disney has this Galaxy Star Cruiser hotel experience. It is a 2-night, 3-day immersive Star Wars experience where you essentially will pretend in live action. Gabe, you don't know anything about this? Have you heard anything at all about this?
Not really, no.
Okay, so they're building a hotel, but they're building it to look like a Star Cruiser ship. And you will, as part of your experience, you will board the Star Cruiser through a portal where they'll make it seem like you are, getting transported onto a ship. And then for the course of 2 nights and 3 days, everyone around you is basically going to be role-playing as Star Wars. Like, you can kind of go on adventures, but it's very open-ended. Like, things that you do will change your story all the way throughout, and the cast members obviously have to play along, and you might get pulled into an adventure, like they might have to do some spy work or kind of thing. You're right, it all sounds terrific, but the cost dropped over the weekend or recently, and the minimum to participate in this experience is $4,809
for 2 nights.
Nope.
2 nights. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yes,
am I a Jedi at the end of this? Do I have powers?
Nope, you do not.
Okay.
You get nothing. So I asked if, and Kevin, you'll have to answer this, if our resident Star Wars geek, Jake Hamilton, would pay, is he going to pay to book passage on the Galactic Star Cruiser? Now, we have to keep in mind, Jake is, a Star Wars fanatic. Like, you imagine any kind of world that you adore, and they're telling you that, like, you get to step inside of it. Is this something where you say, like, it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, I understand the price, but I got to chuck it, because I have to do this. So the choices, Kev, for you, and remember, people are answering on behalf of Jake, is definitely, or probably not. And where do you think the people went?
No question, it's probably not. I know Jake well enough to know he wouldn't drop that kind of cash on something like that. And it's nothing to do with the fact that he's not interested in doing it and not a fan of it. It's just an absurd price. I mean, I mean, like, I'm trying to think of what I would spend that money on.
Let me tell you this. Okay?
Even like a Terminator 2 or like an Interstellar.
a cruise that's going to show all the Christopher Nolan movies, and you get time to sit down with Nolan after each movie and discuss them.
Dude, I would pay $5,000 to do that.
That's the point.
Now, let me clarify a couple things. Cruises are relatively expensive anyways.
Sure.
Like I go on a lot of cruises, so you're already dropping over $2,000 when you go on a cruise anyways.
Yes.
Now,
but they're all inclusive.
I'm not saying,
you get everything like your food and your drink and all that jazz.
Right.
Oh, is this not all inclusive?
And I'm not.
Oh, I don't think so.
No, it's not. No.
So I'm still paying for my blue milk or whatever.
That's the room cost, essentially. To get into the room.
Jesus.
Yes.
Well, Shawn,
here's the thing.
I have a pitch. Did we answer the poll for the audience at home, by the way?
Well, 70% of the people in the poll said
probably not.
Said definitely. No, 70% said Jake Hamilton will definitely do this.
They think Jake is more loose with his wallet than I think they realize.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify. I don't have $5,000 to drop, but if I was offered a cruise with Christopher Nolan, I would make that happen. Only because it would be like a once in a lifetime experience.
That's a credit card statement you're willing to explain to Laura.
I have heard you say that if we hadn't had all these experiences with Tarantino, and that you had an opportunity to meet Quentin Tarantino. I'm not even talking about a 2-night, 3-day thing. Like, if that was just to go and have him sign something of yours, and you get to meet him and have a quick conversation, you said you would have dropped coin in order to do that.
Well, the night we were at the event in LA, at the New Beverly, like, I remember walking into that theater and us going up to the stage to test our mics and sound check. And I genuinely had this moment where I said to myself, okay, if I didn't have this job and I have never met Quentin Tarantino, I wasn't co-hosting a podcast and interviewing him, and I saw this event online, I would have 100% bought a plane ticket, paid for a hotel, got a ticket to the show, just to walk up to him and tell him how much he means to me, and then get him to sign something. And I spent the entire night at the end, after we were done with everything, watching each and every single fan walk up, and I thought to myself, I would have paid all the money in the world just to have that moment. 1, to sit there, watch him get live interviewed. 2, to watch him read from the book.
That was cool.
I mean, that's priceless.
It's a great time for us to plug. Go check that out if you haven't.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Shawn, I will pitch this. I'll mention. I mean, we host a fairly popular podcast.
Arguably.
Which is run by a very popular website.
Yes. Indeed.
I mean, let's see if we can get a sponsor or two to send the Real Blend Boys for a couple nights. We'll shoot the whole
Star
thing.
Wars?
Brought to you by Coca-Cola. That's a good idea.
4,800 times 4. I can't do the math in my head.
Hey, that's sponsorship money. You know, that's for Coca-Cola to figure out.
Wait, Shawn, just don't go to Shake Shack for a month, and you can afford it.
True.
Yeah, that's true.
They're raising those prices.
Just just drop the Shake Shack.
It's hard to do. It's very hard to do. All right, let's get to our interview.
It's $25 for a French fry there.
Because we're all really proud of this week's interview. This is director Shawn Levy, who people know from the Night at the Museum franchise, and he did Real Steel, and now he is doing Free Guy, of which you'll learn later in the show is one of Kevin's very favorite films of this year. So he was super geeked out to get him. We were all geeked out to get him, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this conversation. We get really technical, but we also break down the important stuff about the movie. It's spoiler free, so you can go into this having not seen the movie. So let's dive right in. Shawn Levy on Real Blend.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. We are a filmmaker-driven podcast. We love talking about filmmaking and cameras and lenses. So we want to dive into some technical stuff with you as well. I brought this up to you earlier in the television press day, but I want to dive deeper into the opening oneer of this film. It's truly one of the most immersive oneers and immersive openings I've seen in a film in a long time, because you start off high and we go down to the street, and it's you're entering the world, and then you're in it the entire time. And then the pacing is gorgeous and beautiful throughout the rest of it. So I was curious in terms of production, how you pulled off that wonder, how important that shot was to you, how much time it took, because it's incredible.
Well, so thank you. First of all, I always knew that I wanted to start with a jab right out of the gate, right? I mean, so many of my favorite filmmakers, they open strong and then you stick to landing. That is so kind of everything in filmmaking. And so I wanted to see if I could introduce Free City and the almost absurdist mayhem of it in a single shot. That shot, those opening, whatever it is, 60 seconds, if that was months. And we had more meetings about that 60 seconds than anything else in the entire movie, because that was a combination of digital effects, practical effects, stunts, movie star cameos, and it all had to work in perfect sync. So we literally, sometimes you start with a storyboard and then you go to previs, which is a moving computer rendering of the shot. With a shot that is so motion dependent, as is the Oneer, we went straight to previs. I would describe the beats and how I wanted one thing to flow into the next, There's also dialogue involved. So we prevised it, and I think we probably did, at least a dozen different versions of the previs. And then we would just have mind-numbing meetings going, okay, where does it become practical? Okay, so what do we need for the real car to do? How do we put the famous actor who's in the opening sequence in that car? Oh, that's a separate shoot. So stunt unit is shooting this blue Bugatti in the streets of Boston. I'm gonna stitch it with, in some cases, a digital Bugatti speeding through the streets of Boston. But then I need to put this actor and this actress in the car, and that's a separate shoot with a motion control camera moving around a non-driving vehicle to make it look like it's a moving car. So the complexity it was relentless. Huge shout out to Swen Gilberg, who's my VFX supervisor. And Swen, I had worked with Swen. He was like the lieutenant on Real Steel. And since you're a film-centric podcast, I'll just share, there is such a lesson, guys, in whatever you're doing, do it as exceptionally as you can. I got my first movie, which was Big Fat Liar, because those producers remembered an episode of a Nickelodeon show called Cousin Skeeter that I had done way earlier.
Wow.
Swen was the lieutenant. He wasn't a supervisor on Real Steel, but he was always this guy, this quiet figure. I was like, who's this Swen? He feels like he knows what he's doing. And he's been like the number 3 or the number 2 on Avengers and Endgame and a lot of Marvel, but he never got the shot. He never got the title and the chair. So on Free Guy, I was like, this guy's ready. This guy's ready. And so I hired Swen to be the supervisor, and he was everything. It was like one of those things where, that guy's always been a superstar. He just needed his moment. And Free Guy is that moment. And the VFX, I think you'll agree, in this movie are as good as any I've seen in anything.
That's
what a story.
Amazing.
That's
awesome.
Fantastic.
Sort of building off of that, over the years, I think video games have become increasingly cinematic. A lot of times the cutscenes in between the time when you get to play yourself are equally compelling, and you sort of follow it. So I'm just curious if you appreciate the actual directing that goes into video games, and did you try to work any of those type of techniques into Free Guy?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how cinema and gaming have cross-pollinated, right? Video game design has become more cinematic. Movie action sequences have a higher bar to meet because of the choreography and camera work that video games are able to do. So I do feel that both gaming and film have pushed each other to higher thresholds of excellence and expectation. As is known, I spent, I think, a year, maybe more, on Uncharted, developing a completely new approach to Uncharted. And so I really got in the weeds of that game in particular. And it's such a cinematic game with characters and cutscenes that are as important as the gameplay. And I do feel like all of that informed my approach to this movie, where I really wanted 2 very different visual styles. And if you want to take a deeper dive, I'm happy to. But sure. I wanted the video game world of Free City to feel like an augmented, heightened, poppier game reality that also looked photoreal. And then I needed the real world where Taika Waititi's character and Joe Keery and Utkarsh Budkar exist that look completely different. So we literally, I've never done this quite to this extent, where before we shot, we created rigorous rules about here's the game, here's real life, colors, camera, composition, camera work, so all of it were like divided in the middle, and we followed our own rigorous rules throughout.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. It's so cool. It works. You can tell the visual styles.
Because I remember the studio was always like, well, there's going to be viewer confusion. You got to be prepared for viewer confusion. Because, you're going back and forth, and you're not using, it's not like I'm saying like, now we're in Free City. Meanwhile, back in the real world, none of that lame, like subtitle stuff. So I needed the visual language to be very clear. And it meant like, I can give you a few examples. Like Free City is poppy, saturated, warm colors. The Real World is grays, blacks, and blues. Free City was shot on an RE large format 65 with Sphero lenses with tremendous depth of field, clean compositions, whereas The Real World was on a completely different camera on anamorphic lenses, largely handheld, through a lot of foreground, messier camera work, so that you always know which world you're in because of the visual differentiation.
That's awesome.
I remember Spielberg did something similar on Ready Player One, where I think Kaminsky shot 35 in The Real World and then digital, obviously, within the game. And then when you would go in and out, it was like a jarring thing. Like the worlds were so different. So I love that you play with that. Jake, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. Shawn, without revealing who they are, obviously, I want to touch on some of the cameos in this film. And just from a director's perspective, how one goes about setting those up. Is it the equivalent of like a buddy calling me and asking me to help him move and being like, dude, I'll give you like pizza and a beer? Is it?
1,000%. I mean, yes, except if your buddy was one of the biggest movie stars. The truth is that, as Ryan has said, even though like Hollywood is this absurd, over the top kind of industry, it's also still a community. And it's a community of people who all do similarly creative jobs. And so every cameo in the movie was a result of a phone call or a text and just asking for a favor. And it led to a lot of yeses.
I need better friends. Like if that's,
we all do.
If that's who you're calling.
Yeah, I know. Like, Shawn, I just want that contact list.
Yeah.
Shawn, I was always curious about this. In terms of Stranger Things, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, you've directed episode 3 and 4 for every season. Just those 2 episodes. And I was wondering
why is it so random? Yeah. So it started off in season 1. In season 1, it was out of necessity. The brothers, I mean, again, nobody knew what we were doing. I had never produced television. The boys were like these 31-year-old twins with like the greatest script that I've ever read. And so and Netflix said yes. And the initial plan was that the brothers were going to direct all of them. And as we were making episodes 1 and 2, it became clear, like, oh no, we don't have the other scripts finished. So I basically said, okay, I'll go to Atlanta, I'll do 3 and 4 just to buy you time to go write episodes 6, 7, and 8, or whatever it was. So season 1, it was out of necessity. Little did I know I would be lucking into some of the most iconic moments in television history, with the Christmas lights, with the Demogorgon coming through the wall, with the lights RUN run. Like episode 3 and 4, man, they're always that flexion point between setting up the characters and shit going nuts. And so season 1, I literally just did it. Okay, brothers, I'll be the big brother. Go back to the writing hole. I'll do it. And then season 1 hit the way it did. And the brothers and I just kind of said, all right, well, you know what? Change nothing. Like, we're just superstitious enough.
That's funny.
To not want to mess with fate. And that's why I always direct 3 and 4 in every season, including the one that's upcoming.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty great. Shawn, I want to transition to this because I have 2 teenage boys. They're 17 and 13, and they have a great mix of in-person hangouts, but they also rely on online games and platforms to be social. And so watching Free Guy, that was one of the things that I took away from it is this free city and places where people can interact. And I'm wondering what working on this film sort of taught you about the interactivity of games like this, and if your opinion on them has changed after being immersed in the material.
Actually, yes. And you really are touching on the main epiphany that I had, the main thing I learned and did not anticipate about gaming, which is, I think that I used to think of it as isolationist, right? That it's people sitting alone in their homes, living out an adventure through avatars in this kind of aspirational other reality. And it is that, right? Everything I just said remains true. But what I did not factor in, and I think has evolved more and more and more, and obviously explosively evolved during the pandemic, is the communities that exist in-game among individuals who can be in different parts of the world, sharing no similarities in their real lives, but who connect when they're playing a game together. And so I think that the realization for me was the social and connective value of gaming. I did not realize it was that profound. And as such, I did not realize it was that important to so many people. And I now know better.
It's awesome.
Wow. Shawn, I'm going to ask this just because you guys were talking about Stranger Things, so I'm going to bump up a question on my list. Whenever I become invested in a series, I instantly start kind of going into that self-preservation worried mode where I start wondering, okay, how much further do we have to go? How much longer is this going to go? Are we closer to the end than we are to the beginning? And do you know what the end of the story is?
I am not at liberty to answer your first question. But we do know the end. It's not, to a very small number of people, we know where we're going. And
so there are only three people on this if you want to just, you know.
You're not going to tell anyone, right? Guys, if you promise you won't tell anyone.
I promise.
Can't do it.
And honestly, going back to this idea of the special effects in this film, I want to talk about Dude. Because I can't get over how incredible that character looks, and just the idea of what that character does. Could you walk us through kind of how you created what we're seeing on screen? I mean, it's a real bodybuilder, I believe, and then Ryan does it with facial capture.
Yes, exactly. So a lot of people have told me they assume that Dude was beefed up digitally. Let me first of all tell you that's not true. That is Aaron Reed. Is a real bodybuilder who we found in Venice, California, and who is like 6'7" and that big.
That's insane.
There is no digital augmentation of Dude's body. So, but to really do justice to it, I have to again credit Ryan. In our very first meeting, we were talking about the themes and the inspirations for the movie we wanted to make, and he goes, oh, by the way, since Antoine is the villain, but Antoine is never really in the game and I can't really fight him, I need a formidable opponent. So what if they do an upgrade of me? What if it's me 2.0? And my name's Guy, so his name should be Dude. And the movie should end with Dude versus Guy. So that was a Ryan idea. Before we rewrote a word of the script, that was Ryan's idea. So once we decided to do that, it was like, how do we do this? Do we shoot Ryan and just jack him up digitally? We ultimately found this bodybuilder, Aaron Reed, and then we, in post-production, so Aaron did the whole shoot with dots on his face. And the advantage of that is that I'm shooting a real person in a real scene with fellow actors. That's the reason not to do it with a tennis ball or a purely digital creation. And Real Steel taught me that. Like, if you can have something real on set for your actors, the movie's better, period. Then in post, so we had Aaron Reed doing the scenes. Ryan went into something called the egg. It sounds very sci-fi, and it's not unlike this setup here, where it looks like a holographic, like, transporter or something. It's this metallic enclosure, and the actor sits in it, and inside the enclosure are like 1,000 lights. And the actor in the egg then has to look at pre-programmed lights inside the egg to correspond with how the body and neck of the A-side body moved.
Oh my gosh.
And while they're looking, so literally Ryan would go in, it's like, okay, we're doing this shot. And the person running the egg session goes, blue, red, magenta, green. And Ryan literally has to look at blue light, red light, magenta light, green. And while he's doing that, he is awesome. Saying the dialogue and acting. So that's called the egg, and it's the current kind of highest level of facial capture mocap that exists. And it looks photoreal in the movie, as you saw.
That's unbelievable. That is so cool. Technology
is so fun getting to nerd out on this stuff. No one ever wants to know about this stuff.
We want to know. No,
you're on the perfect show.
You're on the right show, man. This is all we do all day.
Nice. Shawn, there are definitely those scenes in the movie where Ryan's character specifically has to describe food. Like in one, he's describing a cup of coffee. In other ones, it's the bubblegum ice cream. They strike me as scenes where Ryan probably gives you endless examples of things that you can use in the edit.
No. Not true, but those lines, absolutely 100% written by Ryan Reynolds. They're so Ryan Reynolds voice, right? Like something tastes so good, it's like my tongue had a baby with the sunrise.
I love that one.
Or like, where he's eating ice cream and he's like, I used to think that coffee was my favorite food, but now it tastes like liquid suffering. Like Ryan, so in Ryan's earliest dialogue punch-up of the script, he wrote those lines. And every time I watch the movie, I'm like, that is the very specific Ryan Reynolds-esque tone of comedy writing where he's so verbally astute, so verbally specific, and no one can quite describe things. It's, he drinks the coffee. It's like, I've lost my virginity, but in my mouth. It's like, it's a little dirty, but it's not quite rated R. It's classic Ryan.
Do you have to figure out how to edit him then for his comedy? Because comedy can be ruined in an edit almost.
Yes, but where Ryan and I are very similar, and we produce this movie together, very proactively together, like on set together, rewriting together, in the edit room together, is Ryan, like me, knows that comedy is largely a rhythm thing. So very often, if a joke isn't working, what I'll do is I'll literally go like this, and I don't look at the movie. And I go, play it again. Play it again. Okay, we need 3 more frames of silence before the 4th word. And it's literally, and Ryan works that way too. It's a rhythm thing. It's music. And sometimes just the absence of air or the addition of air makes all the difference between a laugh and crickets.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Wow.
That's incredible. Thank you.
I wish I were talented.
We do too, Jake.
Shawn, you have not only just worked with amazing comedy legends, but comedy actors who have a very specific style in how they deliver, whether it's Ryan or Robin Williams or Ben Stiller, Tina Fey or Steve Carell. I'm sort of curious, as a director, what is the balance of stepping in and being a director and saying, look, this is how you need to do it, this is how you need to A to B to C to D, versus knowing that like these guys know what they're doing and I just kind of need to step back and watch the magic unfurl?
I have so many answers to that, but I don't want to take too much time. But there's a few aspects to it. Number one, every collaborator you just mentioned is a writer as well. So what you actually will notice if you look at my resume is I love comedic actors who are also writers. Here's why. They still riff, they improvise. You want to let them go off leash. But if they're a writer like Steve Martin, like Ben Stiller, like Ricky Gervais, like Owen Wilson, like Tina Fey, like Steve, like everyone you mentioned, they're going to riff, but with an awareness of story, with an awareness of, okay, but here's still the point of the scene. And so I love collaborators who are true partners. And so I do give them a lot of leeway, because if I just wanted human props to say scripted words, I would not hire those people. That would be asinine. So I want partnership. I know my movies are better because I'm looking for actual true collaboration. The other thing that I'll just touch on is there's this magic trick that happens on movies when they're working, where as a director, you start to be able to channel what that actor will make funny. So, you can't force it, and it's not intellectual. But even with Taika, for instance, by day 3, he's doing a scene, and now I have his voice in my head, and I'm able to throw out joke suggestions from behind the camera that I know will work in his voice. It's not funny if I say it. It wouldn't be funny if Ryan Reynolds said it. It's specific to that performer. And the same thing has happened with Ryan. And what's fun about a movie like this is you're flowing with Taika, you're flowing with Ryan, you're flowing with Utkarsh, right? And it's very different voices. But the fun of directing is you get to speak with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's awesome.
As I sat down in the theater yesterday, well, one, this is a phenomenal theatrical experience, and I'm so happy that it's only going to be released in theaters. Excuse me. And at the beginning of the film, Ryan comes on screen and has that message to the audience, and so it just kind of reminded me of how much fun the theatrical experience really is. I know we've been home a lot over the past year and a half or so, and seeing films in a theater with the communal experience is everything. And I was wondering, throughout your career, even younger when you were growing up, do you have a favorite theatrical experience that comes to mind, like the ultimate one where the movie itself was made better because of being in a theater?
Every movie is made better for being experienced collectively. So like Ryan and my current new movie is for Netflix, but make no mistake, man, this is my job. I want it experienced as big, loud, and communally as possible. It's better. This is why I do it. That's number one, especially comedy, right? Where the laughs become a living, breathing organism. But for me, the two that come to mind, very different. One is like, I saw Jedi 10, 12 times in the, what is that, 82? I don't remember, but like, wow. And literally, you know, that scene where like Luke is hiding and Vader, or like it's the Emperor going like, perhaps if you won't turn to the dark side, your sister will, right? And fucking Luke comes out of there, and they go into that goddamn, you know, towards the set. Like every time the audience is like, yes, fuck yes. Like that feeling is the best feeling. And conversely, the other one that comes to mind is when I was in college, I went to a screening of Gallipoli by Peter Weir. And the last 4 minutes of Gallipoli is masterful, deeply, deeply moving. And I sat there just shattered. And so, and it was a pin drop in that theater after. And the fact that something made up on a screen can have that effect on us humans, sitting in a dark room among strangers, that is a remarkable thing. And it's a beautiful thing, in my opinion.
Shawn, did you have to fight to not have this on Disney Plus on a day and date? I know this is 20th Century Studios versus Disney, but I know Disney's putting it out in that regard. But the fact that this is exclusively in theaters is a big deal. And I wonder, did you have to fight to not have the day and date on Disney Plus?
No, it was always, I mean, to be honest, I don't even know the details of the like 20th Century Fox Disney deal. But no, I was lucky because Disney bought Fox, we made the movie. Disney came to our test screenings. So the top brass of Disney was there in a theater when we tested this movie. And this movie, when it is played for a movie theater of strangers, it is raucous. It's huge laughs, it's emotion, it's cheers. And so they felt what this movie has in its DNA. And there was never a conversation about not waiting and preserving that audience theatrical experience.
That's the best thing I've heard in a long time. This is definitely a theatrical experience for sure. No question.
Shawn, this man's appearance is in the marketing, so I wanted to ask you about it. Did you get a chance to direct Alex Trebek?
I didn't get a chance to direct Alec. We sent a small crew. We used his show's equipment. But again, that was an example where we're sitting in the editing room and Ryan and I were like, okay, we need to make Blue Shirt Guy famous. We need to tell the audience that Blue Shirt Guy is becoming a global phenomenon. How can we do that? And we came up with a lot of new ideas and we literally went and shot them while we were editing. And one of them was the Jeopardy idea, because if you're a Jeopardy answer, you're a cultural phenomenon, right?
Sure.
And it was a matter of Ryan just calling and asking. And again, it's what we said. It's like Ryan's attitude, and I share it, is let's just ask. The other person can always say no.
Sure.
And he very graciously said yes, and now it's a part of our movie and his legacy forever, which is really meaningful to us.
Yeah, that was cool.
Wow, that's Shawn, about 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago or so, you directed an episode of a show called Birds of Prey. And at that time, I feel like the average person on the street didn't really know who Harley Quinn was, or didn't know who Canary was. And over the last 5-6 years or so, because of the films, they've become much more popular and kind of in mainstream. In fact, Suicide Squad's out this weekend. I'm sort of curious, what is that like for you as a storyteller to sort of see these characters who you got to play in their sandbox 20 years ago, all of a sudden blow up and become these big pop culture phenomenons?
Yeah, it is just a weird thing when you've been in this business doing this job for a while and seeing the evolution and the way that things catch a wave and kind of come to the forefront of culture, the way something that was supposed to be, I mean, listen, talk to Ryan about Green Lantern, talk to, a lot of, like, people always think they know what's going to break, what's going to be a thing. But the truth is, like, culture has this ebb and flow. And it is really interesting that something that was an obscure, marginalized title and set of characters is now so much kind of in the forefront. And things that were targeted as phenomenon, juggernaut, going to be huge, were just like, poof. Oh, we're not doing that? Like it's very interesting how like you can never quite predict it, and you certainly can't control it. So I now I enjoy just watching it as a spectator because it's constantly evolving and shifting.
That's awesome.
Shawn, I was fascinated by this. I don't know if this is a ridiculous question to ask, but the wake ups that guy has in the film are very important in terms of like character arc and things like that. Like when he wakes up, that whatever's the look on his face is that day is kind of where he is as a character in the arc. Did you shoot all those wake ups on like one day and just tell like Ryan, all right, Ryan, you're waking up here. This is what's happening here. Is it that simple?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So we built that set. I think like all the sets, I think it's such clever, witty design by Ethan Tobman. And we would shoot him waking up, and then it would be ridiculous and time wasting to move the camera. So we just set up right there on the same kind of wide angle lens where he comes forward into this big happy-go-lucky. But then I would cut and I go, okay, now we're doing scene 72. You've been killed by the train repeatedly, and you want today to be different. Roll camera, action, and Ryan would just give me a different performance, and I would just give him enough words to situate him in the overall arc so he would know which version of guy he should be playing.
We are going to run out of time, and I want to emphasize this has been a really tough interview to prep for because there's so many surprises in your movie, and we really want to preserve them for the audience.
Thank you.
And so we've danced around a lot, but I can't let you go without you singing the praises of Jodie, who's just fantastic.
Thank you.
Knowing her from Killing Eve. Oh, I'm sorry. What'd you think I was going to ask?
I thought you were going to ask me about cameos that I don't want to talk about. So thank you for not.
No, I want to praise
Comer.
Jodie, who just blew me away because I know her from Killing Eve. And it's such a different side of her and shows her versatility. So if you could just praise her.
I knew her from Killing Eve. Thank you. I share your admiration of her talent, and literally I knew her from Killing Eve. I made Ryan watch an episode of Killing Eve because he didn't know her work then, and then I must have read about 60 actresses, many of whom were more famous than Jodie Comer for this role, which is basically as big a part as Ryan's, right? Because she exists in both worlds. And we came down to 5 actresses, and we brought them all to a final callback with Ryan, who would read with them, and me in the room. And everyone did really well. And as I said, Jodie was by far the least namey candidate. But within 3 sentences, Ryan is doing the reading. He's reading with Jodie. And he turns to me. He's like, here, I'm gonna reenact it for you. It was like this. It was like his back, like you're me, I'm Ryan. And Ryan goes like this. And that's literally, we knew, like, and then afterwards she left the room. We're like, I feel like I'm looking at Meryl Streep and Kramer versus Kramer, like a revelation. And that someday we're going to proudly say, oh, you know that multi-Oscar winner, Jodie Comer? We gave her first movie.
You got to tell Ryan as a producer. Well, as a producer, that ruins your negotiating tactics if he makes that reaction right in front of her.
I know, he wasn't very subtle, but I'm also not subtle, so I'm constantly undermining my own negotiating strength.
Well, we are out of time and we have to wrap, but honestly, Shawn, this is, when we were told we were getting time with you, we were all blown away. It's a thrill to have you on our show, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Guys, I'm so excited to listen to your show now that I know you get into the weeds of all the nitty-gritty, and, I find all of it fascinating to talk about, to listen about, to hear other people's approaches to how the work is made. Because of course, movies don't just appear out of thin air. They get the result of a lot of decisions and a lot of people's hard work. So thanks for unpacking all of it.
3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1.
Sorry. Jesus Christ.
Sorry. Leave that in.
We want to thank Disney very much for giving us time with Shawn Levy. Hope you guys enjoyed our spoiler-free guy conversation with him. See, it didn't work.
Because we already knew.
Go see Free Guy when it comes to theaters. We will talk about it later on in our Now in theaters. Oh, Kev, I want to ask you one question about this because I've seen this being circulated around as a rumor, not that it's going to happen, but people seem very convinced that Shawn Levy will direct Deadpool 3. Do you think that's
honestly, and that's the question I wish we asked him in the interview, because like I kept thinking, like, after I saw Free Guy, I was like, okay, who's going to direct Deadpool 3? I think it's going to come down to 2 people. I think Taika could step in and do it, because I think Taika and Ryan Reynolds love each other in terms of just from a performance perspective and an acting perspective, but also Ryan's obsessed with Taika as a filmmaker. I mean, I think there was, what was the film? The Wilder
Hunt for the Wilder People.
Hunt for the Wilder
Right,
People.
that's the film
Beautiful.
That was like Ryan's favorite film apparently that year, and so
Is that why
and then
he
obviously
cast,
Taika.
he cast the kid in Deadpool 2?
Oh,
Right,
remember
that's
the actor's
exactly.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Julian
Dennison.
Dennison.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Hey, there we go.
Teamwork
there we go.
here.
Teamwork. But yeah, so then that's obviously, and I would argue that's why Julian ended up in Deadpool 2. But I mean, obviously with Taika being in Free Guy, it's an interesting question. I think Shawn Levy might be, I don't know who would be a better choice for that. I mean, I wonder do you think Taika could do a good job at Deadpool 3, or do you think Shawn would be a better director for that?
Here's the thing. If you don't like Taika's humor, so I think that he'll go.
I'm on the
Deadpool's
fence
humor
with
is
it.
kind of established, though, right?
It is, and I think a lot of it's driven by Ryan Reynolds. You know, he's clearly writing for him. He's maintained the voice of Deadpool through two different directors up to this point. It Tim Miller and then David Leitch, the two guys who
David
directed?
Leitch.
Yeah,
I think Shawn's a good choice. Don't get me wrong. I think Shawn Levy would be a great choice. I just think I can't help but think that he would either go with him or Taika. Those are the two that I could see him pulling in. I would love to have asked Shawn Levy. He probably would have just given us a very politically correct answer, I guess, in terms of like, you know.
Is David Leitch like firm? He's not going to return. They haven't said, or is it possible?
I'm not sure. But I mean, to the point, the movie hasn't even really been. You know, I know they're kicking around ideas or working on scripts and things like that, so I'm not sure they're put to the point of director. My only concern would be that Shawn Levy. I don't know if Shawn Levy has an R-rated movie on his resume. You know,
it's a great question. Yeah, and does Taika? Well, what was Wilder People rated?
No, but I think he has the capability of going to an R faster than the guy who did Real Steel, you know. And I mean, no disrespect, Shawn Levy keeps it at PG-13, and his movies do well because of that.
Yeah, he's directed a lot of Stranger Things, right? Was he there for all 3 seasons so
far? And that's technically R-rated. Yeah, so he did episodes 3 and 4 of every season, which he tells us in the interview, if you heard it already, where he explains why that he did that. But one thing I'm interested in knowing, though, since Taika is already so well MCU versed, I mean, if you think about it, he did the new Thor, he did Ragnarok. I could see that being part of the conversation of like, all right, Taika's already infused in the MCU as a filmmaker. And now Deadpool's going to be in the MCU. And think about some of the promotion they've done for Free Guy. They did that whole thing with Korg and Deadpool. Yep. So I just feel like they're setting it up. They're almost like they're teeing it up a little bit for Taika to step in there. And plus, I think about the internet reaction to that.
Hold on. Taika's doing a Star Wars movie. Now, I don't know if that's going to prevent him from doing it or like when that's happening, but he is
it's interesting
working on that. So that could prevent him from.
I would argue. So let me ask you this: what do you think would be a bigger deal for Taika to do a Star Wars film or direct Deadpool 3?
Star Wars.
Yeah, I think Star Wars.
In terms of like, you think that would be like the best route for him to go?
I don't think anyone thinks of Deadpool in the sense of who directed it, other than us. Like,
that's interesting.
It's a Ryan Reynolds comedy. Like, I don't even think did Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick do both? Both films?
Mm-hmm. They wrote both scripts.
I think outside of our circle, no one even thinks about the writing. They think about it. All feels like Ryan Reynolds writing as far as the jokes, and Ryan Reynolds owns Deadpool so much that I think it's his project entirely, no matter who's.
And even in Deadpool 2, like Brolin's cable stole a lot of focus away from even who directed it. You know, like it's kind of like if you add good characters, Zazie Beetz, is really good as Domino. So
it doesn't really feel like a filmmaker's playground. Like it kind of feels like it's its own.
The reason why I say Star Wars for Taika is because how many times do you get a chance at doing that? Like this would be his third movie in the Marvel universe. It would be the third Deadpool movie, or he could go put his unique stamp on a Star Wars movie, like not a lot of people have been able to do.
And Star Wars really needs to feel fresh.
Yeah,
right. So, we need a voice.
And talk about fresh. Taika Waititi, everything he puts out feels great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's interesting about the conversation we're having now that I'm talking more about it out loud, it seems like Shawn Levy almost could be the better choice here based on what we just said, because, this is not a slight towards Shawn Levy. I think Shawn Levy just is good at directing general films. Mm-hmm. Night at the Museum and Real Steel.
He's a studio
director.
Doesn't have a voice.
100%. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Correct. And I think, so in terms of Taika, even though Taika's comedy would fit well, I think, with Deadpool. Even though I listen, I like Taika Waititi. I just didn't love Ragnarok as much as everybody else did. I appreciated it from a visual and an action perspective. I just didn't love the jokes particularly. But I do feel it's interesting to think about this now. I think Shawn Levy might be the best pick for this now that I'm thinking about it, just because it would be a less
of the two, sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
All right, let's get to talking points, because this is a topic that we've been going over a lot recently, and something broke somewhat shortly after we recorded, but it's really impactful for what's coming up in 2022, which is the fact that Warner Brothers had promised that this day and date experiment that they were doing for this year for all of their films going to HBO Max at the same exact time that they went to theaters is going to go away. And so in 2022, AMC has Warner Brothers agreed to a deal with AMC Theaters that they are going to implement a 45-day window between when films play in theaters and when they go to streaming service. And I wonder if they're available on home video at that point too, or if it's just when they go to HBO Max.
Yeah.
Oh, have you heard anything?
No, I was just going to say I think that's probably just HBO Max.
So that calls into question a number of films that Warner Brothers still has coming out this year theoretically. My immediate thought was that like Dune should push, right? But like Dune is like end of October, you know, like the one I really wonder if it's going to push is Matrix 4. We haven't heard. It's still down for December. I actually verified with the studio this week after that news dropped on AMC. I was like, hey, is Matrix 4 still a movie that's happening? Because like we don't know a title. You haven't given us there hasn't been a promo image. You know, there hasn't been anything that this movie is coming in December. And if they now have a 45-day window built in 2022 and they're a December release, I could very easily see them pushing into February or March of 2022 in order to benefit from that window. I think Dune, I think the ship has sailed. You know, I think with an October release, it's going to have to hold it. And it may suffer some of the fates that we're going to discuss next with Suicide Squad, but I think, well, because it's going to Toronto, it's going to Venice, you know, I don't think they can play them at the film festivals and then tell you, hey, we'll see you in January or early February. I think that's just mean.
That's a good point.
But let's get back to the 45-day window. Kev, this is something you've been really pushing for. How do you feel about the fact that Warner Brothers is implementing this?
I feel great about it. I mean, I obviously, I wish they could implement it even the rest of this year. I wish they could just let it be for Dune and the rest of the films. I know we're still in a pandemic, but like I said last week on the show, prior to the pandemic, there was a 90-day window. It was already there. It already existed. You went to the theaters, then you had a 90-day window until you got to home. So 45 days, first of all, we said this in the show last week or 2 weeks ago, I'm cool with a month, you know what I mean? Just some type of exclusivity. Like I just saw Lin-Manuel Miranda posted about Tick, Tick, Boom, which is the film he directed, and it's going to theaters exclusively for a week and then going to Netflix. And that made me excited. Now, it's only a week, but it still pushes the theatrical to be the first place you have to go to see it. So in terms of 45 days, that sounds like Christmas almost, right? Because I was a little worried about what this window was going to end up being. And I got to a point in my mind, and you guys have known my perspective on this has shifted a lot over the years with Roma and Shawn, you know that as well. And just in terms of access to films, and I get that not everybody has access to a theater, but 45 sounds great to me. I mean, actually, to me, it sounds like more than I was surprised they went that high. I thought they were going to go 30 or maybe like 17 days like Universal did. But 45 is amazing. And I think that's a great compromise. It's half the time. And these massive Warner Brothers films, I just wish Dune and Matrix could fall into that category. And I know Denis Villeneuve would probably agree with that. And, you know, Shawn, you and I were discussing this over the weekend, that great article you sent me from Variety that Denis wrote in terms of the HBO Max deal and kind of what that's going to do to the industry. And, you know, from that article itself, I don't know if, Shawn, you agree, I got a sense that he was worried about not being able to make the next Dune movie.
Yes.
Just based on the financial success of what's going to happen with the first Dune. And I know, Gabe, you said you were very confident about that second Dune movie getting made, but I just worry that without a theater exclusivity for a film like Dune, and the Suicide Squad numbers that we saw this past weekend, which we'll get into in our next topic, I'm just concerned. I'm genuinely concerned. And I wish for some reason they could give Dune this 45-day exclusivity.
I can't necessarily get into the mind of a Warner Brothers executive who wants to, but I wonder if the day and date release for Dune almost helps ensure that it'll get a second film, because it offers a sort of protection and sort of excuse and this sort of gray area about was it successful or not. Because if it gets the Blade Runner reviews and it gets the Blade Runner sort of love from people who do see it, and that's the sort of audible reception of it, and then we have like who knows where the Delta variant's going to be in this country by then, who knows how this sort of day and date stuff is going to shake up, as we're going to discuss a little bit with Suicide Squad. It almost gives anyone who's in charge of greenlighting that next project the ability to say, we don't really know how well that would have done in a normal year.
Right.
We know it's great, and we know that it needs a part 2 as far as the fans that we know watched it, and the fact that we kind of owe it to this filmmaker and to this property as this sort of seminal classic that we're bringing to the big screen. Like, I think it almost gives whoever that is, whatever team that is of executives, the grayness in its success to sort of move forward versus a hard failure or pass of the week 1 box office.
And you're right in this sense, like, it's an investment in a filmmaker. Like, it's wise from a studio to invest in a filmmaker. And aside from, a topic that we've covered very heavily, which is how Zack Snyder was treated by Warner Brothers, I think largely a lot of filmmakers who work with Warner Brothers are really happy and they stay in the fold. You see a lot of them return. James Wan is making all of his films at Warner Brothers. We're going to see a Clint Eastwood film, and Eastwood has been loyal to Warner Brothers over the years. I'm sure there's several other that I'm not even thinking of, but it feels like Denis is somebody who they'd want to invest in and keep on it. Well, Nolan for a while. Nolan was making Warner Brothers movies, but I want to get to the 2022 films that now are going to benefit from having this 45-day window. The Batman is opening on March 4th, 2022. Baz Luhrmann has an Elvis film coming with Tom Hanks. There's an untitled third Fantastic Beasts film. July 29th is Black Adam. Yes, I don't know. November 4th is The Flash, and December 16th is Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So, blockbusters. We're back to blockbusters that are now going to get the benefit of having theatrical exclusivity, which is something that we've been pushing for as a show for a very long time.
But to Gabe's point about Dune, it's an interesting point about the idea of not knowing whether or not it would have done well because of the times that we're in and kind of what it would have done financially. My only concern about that would be, we discussed this on the show already, but I find this interesting that we as fans of Dune and Denis, we're all going to go to the theater to see it because that's the kind of experience we want to have with that film, right? And so, Gabe, you made a point, I think it was a couple weeks ago, that people probably aren't going to watch that film in massive numbers on HBO Max. I feel like it's kind of and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I would argue that people who want to see Dune and people who know who Denis Villeneuve is know it's shot on IMAX. They want to see it on the biggest screen possible, and Denis is going to be pushing that in the press, and so is the cast. But with the HBO Max numbers, I know we got some data a little bit in terms of what happened with Suicide Squad. I think it was the number 2 most watched film that they released on HBO Max. I don't think Dune's going to even go near Suicide Squad or even Mortal Kombat in terms of at-home viewings. And that concerns me in terms of financial. I
disagree. But so before this year happened and it got complicated with how is COVID and the current situation going to affect Dune, I was feeling very bullish, very strong about, because everyone was comparing Dune to Blade Runner, which is a fair comparison. Sci-fi is in this weird era for the last 10 years or so, or maybe longer, of not really doing well and not really getting a lot of traction as far as like hard science fiction.
Also, I think didn't Arrival like just cross 100 million?
Yeah. So point being, I get wanting to compare it to Blade Runner, but Blade Runner had Ryan Gosling and Harrison Ford.
Yes.
But that's it.
Yeah.
I think Dune has done a great job of casting Oscar Isaac, of casting Aquaman, of casting Timothée Chalamet, who has an incredible young audience.
Zendaya.
Like, it is a star-studded cast. If you were going to pitch this film to an audience who has nothing to do with Dune, who has nothing to do with Denis Villeneuve, there's plenty there for them to enjoy from just who's in it. So I think, I feel strongly that it's a good sell to a general audience if they focus on who's in it. So I don't necessarily know if that's true. It was a long way of me explaining. I think it could I don't know how to read the situation of who's watching at home and who's going to theaters. And even a couple months out, things are progressing poorly here from a COVID standpoint. So who knows how safe anyone's going to feel going in October. But I could see it being a big at-home success, even though that sounds terrible to me. And I don't want to watch it for the first time on my TV.
No.
I could see a general audience going, oh, there's a big star-studded movie that I can watch, and I already have HBO Max because I paid for it for all these films. Like, I could see it doing really well without having to be bought in on the director or the book.
See, I don't think people, I mean, I think we are at a point in time where people aren't going to the movies anymore based on the people who are in them.
But there are like 8 stars that collectively can bring their audience. Like, there's still a small amount of audience. There's just no Will Smith, there's just no like, oh, everyone in America is going to see that movie because this one person. That doesn't exist. But I think that there are, we talk about like the Sebastian Stans of the world, not necessarily in box office, but like we talk about how much interest they gather outside of movie fans that we see on social media and things like that. Like, I think that if a conversation can build up online around it, each of those individuals in the film have such a concentrated audience that they could bring to it. And that's what I would focus on if I was marketing it.
But it's interesting because I think I like someone like a Zendaya or a Chalamet, they will bring in an audience for sure. I just don't know that it'll be a significant enough audience in terms of HBO Max where it would actually move the needle in some way. Because and again, I could be wrong, and I want to be wrong about this. But I don't think Dune's going to have the numbers that Mortal Kombat had on HBO Max. Mortal Kombat is their highest watched, and that movie had no stars in it. And I think, again, I know it's based on a game. I know it's based on a franchise people know. Dune's based on a famous book. It's also based on a movie that came out, there was a movie that came out in the 80s from David Lynch, but it's based on the book, obviously. I just feel like it's an interesting thing, and I think the theatrical of Dune needs to do well. And I don't think the HBO Max is a place where that film is going to make enough numbers or make enough noise to greenlight the next version of it.
They have to put that poster up in multiplex audiences where it says Oscar Isaac is playing Daddy. That will get people. That'll get people buying tickets. That's
also so inside. You know what I mean? Like
sure.
Oscar Isaac, like Ex Machina didn't do 100 million, whatever the box office on that movie was. I mean, Ex Machina is one of the greatest movies I've seen in the last 5 to 10 years.
Heady sci-fi doesn't do great. It's just it's not a genre Dune's that does really well. Yes, but
Dune is a really tough sell.
But the problem is Warner Brothers made this bed. Like this should have been a conversation 2 years ago. They know. I think they know. I think we're not giving enough credit. I think they know going into it of the uphill battle they have to sell a very dense science fiction story. So.
And they would be foolish not to take a look at the fact that no one's made this movie for decades because it was, and even when when Lynch made it. It was an unadaptable book, like forever. It was unadaptable. There's documentaries about it, about people trying to do it, and it was always too expensive. Right. There wasn't enough technology. And famously, decade over decade, people talk about it. It comes up. It was always, we can't pull it off. And it looks like they did in some way. It looks great. They have a great filmmaker. They have a great cast. Yeah. We have the technology to make whatever we need real. I wouldn't be surprised if Warner Brothers was just like, hey, like Shawn said, we are investing in this filmmaker. We are investing in the landscape of film. We want to make big, interesting movies. We will make billions of dollars on our superhero stuff. We can afford to lose whatever we lose on this.
Yep, maybe.
But they're not making billions of dollars on their superhero stuff.
That's beside the point. Like, I mean, we're talking about this year. I mean, in a normal world.
Yeah. So let's see, and we'll get into Squad, but I would argue I don't think Squad would have done that much better.
Let's go ahead and just go into it
in a different time frame.
I want to discuss these numbers. So let me give you the box office numbers for Suicide Squad. It did 26.2 million domestically. It did 45.2 million internationally. And immediately we're going to go to the excuse of essentially saying, okay, well, it's COVID and maybe people don't feel safe going. But over the course of this weekend, as we all sort of in the text chain processed what happened, I think we all came up with like legitimate reasons why this movie maybe didn't connect with audiences, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic. It has nothing to do with the safety of, well, I guess it does in a way of people I thought this would be a movie that drew more people out to the theaters as becoming, like, in a way that Black Widow almost ended up becoming. You know, they were like, this is the one I'm going to go see. You know, this is the one that I've been waiting for. The reviews were, it was like 96% fresh. You know, like the reviews were off the charts great. But when you start to do...
Big cast, too. Huge cast.
Huge cast, yes. John Cena, you know, Idris Elba, Margot Robbie. You know, yes, a lot of things that Gabe is pointing to is saying, like, that should work for Dune. You would have thought that it could have worked for Suicide Squad. But instead it feels like a couple of things happened. One, people opted to just watch it at home. And I don't know the numbers, but it just, if they didn't go to the theaters, and yet you still, I saw plenty of talk about it on social media. I saw people, you know, raving about King Shark and talking about Ratcatcher, so people watched it. But the other thing Kevin sort of pointed out was that there was a confusion amongst casual audience members of what is this movie based on the previous Suicide Squad movie. Is it a sequel? Is it a prequel? Is it a remake? How come there are new characters? And how come there are some of the same characters? And, you know, that falls on marketing. That does fall on marketing to push forward that this is a different movie going into it. And what they chose to lean on is it's a James Gunn movie. And I think what these numbers prove is that we know who James Gunn is, but the large number of people outside do not. So, Kev, do you think that that's the driving factor behind these low numbers?
Well, I told you guys this when I was with my parents a couple weeks ago. I mentioned this in the premium episode as well, so apologies if you're hearing this twice. But I was with my dad and mom. I was home for my grandfather's memorial, and I was showing my dad some new trailers that were coming out for some new movies. And I pressed play on the Suicide Squad. He got up to get a drink or something and came back about 25, 30 seconds into the trailer and looked at the screen and said, "Wait a second. Why does this remind me of that Suicide Squad film from a few years ago?" Yeah. And it kind of dawned on me in that moment. I'm like, wait a second. Like, because we live in such a film bubble, right? That we know all about the air cut, what happened to the first film, the studio interference. These are all things that are massive things in our world. And I think I do this. I have a hard time doing this about getting out of Twitter and then trying to realize what is going on in the actual world, right? Because it is a confusing thing. When you're on Twitter, your timeline would have made you think that Suicide Squad was going to make $100 million this weekend. It was the only thing anyone was talking about on my timeline. Everybody was talking about it. Gunn was retweeting all these amazing reviews. But then I thought about my dad, and I'm like, and I'm not saying my dad is the average audience for Suicide Squad, but he did see the first one, and he goes to the movies once a week with my mom. They've always gone to the movies prior to the pandemic. That's kind of how I was raised. He'll just see anything. And he was confused by it. And it got me thinking, like, does the audience know what this is? And when I was on the air reviewing the film, the David Air last week, and reviewing the film, one of the anchors, when they tossed to me, said, "Hey, Kevin, you know, great to have you. So tell us, is this a sequel?" And I literally stopped. I was like, it's a standalone sequel, but it's a soft reboot. But it's, and I was even confused. And I'm an industry person. I work in this industry. And going back to your point about James Gunn, they sold the whole thing on James Gunn. That's another name that is big in our phones, that is big in the film Twitter world, and big in our minds. But the average individual doesn't know who James Gunn is, and they really leaned into that with the Guardians of the Galaxy thing. People know who Guardians of the Galaxy is, but they don't necessarily know who James Gunn is.
I don't think it ever said...
Those two factors are interesting.
I don't think it ever said from the director of Guardians of the Galaxy.
They did have a trailer.
They did say that? Okay,
because I remember
sure.
joking about they put Marvel in their... Yeah, they're joking about DC put a Marvel movie in their trailer. Which I thought was
so let me ask you a question.
It said from the horribly beautiful mind of James Gunn, and then it said like director of Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think was a smart move. And to Gabe's point, it's interesting they threw a Marvel film in there. But to be honest with you, Shawn, I think those 2 points that you just made, that I just made as well, are the reason why the film didn't connect. I honestly think it's confusing. Also, the plot of that film, I couldn't tell you what the plot of that film is. I've seen it twice. I couldn't tell you what the overarching... All I know is it's a group of supervillains. If you can walk me through the details of who they were trying to kill, who each individual was on the island, I would love to hear that, because I've seen it twice.
I don't think it's
I can tell you it's about supervillains saving the world. That's the basic premise.
But I don't
plot was
know.
Convoluted.
We can talk about this off air, but I don't know that it was convoluted. I think maybe it was oversimplified, because it wasn't really trying to be a convoluted... heist rescue mission superhero story. Like I think he played with a lot of that, where like he set up like, oh, you guys are gonna go do this, and you're gonna meet this guy, and you're gonna do this, and then do this, and all those plans sort of fall apart, or like Harley sort of introduces chaos and just ends a storyline that you're like, oh, so that's done. I don't think it was necessarily.
That was a weird detour, Harley's detour.
It was a strange detour. I watched it over the weekend. I'll tell you this. I watched it for the second time over the weekend. And when that scene happened, I remember sitting there going, wait a second, where's the squad? Why are we spending so much time? And I have no problem with the individualized characters and learning more about them. But the film is so ensemble driven, and nobody else really gets their side moments as much as Harley gets. And listen,
but she's the only one she's the only one in the whole movie that has her own movie.
Well, let me ask this.
She's the biggest star.
And she's great in the film. I love her in the film. I actually like the film a lot.
Do you think the inclusion of her led to the most confusion? Because it's the same actress playing the same character in now a third different movie.
I don't think so. So in my opinion, and this is as someone who's coming from the perspective that we're talking about in this bubble and aware of it, I don't know that it's as confused. I get that there are people that will be confused, and there are people that will ask the question, what is this? But I don't think it's really that confusing to just say it's another Suicide Squad movie, because that's all it is. The Suicide Squad is a band of misfits. Like, it's about these prisoners that take a deal. It's a dirty dozen. And this is just that team that exists within this government entity is doing another mission with more prisoners that they have, that they're pulling from their barrel of prisoners that are super powered.
But think about my dad, though.
I get that, and that's anecdotal. I don't think we can hang our argument on one person. I don't think he's alone in that. But I'm just saying, I think that it's not... I think maybe people having the conversation amongst themselves were overthinking it, when what Warner Brothers was trying to do was just going, hey... This is a Suicide Squad movie. This is the Suicide Squad. James Gunn directed it. Like, I don't think they were trying to tie it into anything. I think it can exist just as we know what the concept of a Suicide Squad is. This movie even sets up that there are, multiple teams that she's putting together to pull a mission off. Like, it's just about the concept of getting these supervillains together.
Is going to struggle to get to $60 million domestic.
Domestically, and again, I did want to mention before we move on, what you guys say is valid, but I don't think you meant this when you said it has nothing to do with it. Your points have nothing to do with the pandemic, but it is very true that right now the pandemic is ramping up.
For sure,
people are becoming way more concerned about it. I did see plenty of people that noted that they were just going to watch it at home because they didn't feel safe. Here, I will speak for myself. I ended up watching it at home, partly because of that, partly because of just the time to go to the theater and all that. It was a busy weekend. But that definitely factored in the fact that where I'm at now, we have a mask mandate back. And I'll just speak on this briefly, like about my thinking for anyone who, we always talk about do what you feel is safe. And for me, this second wave and people reinstating the mask mandate, I've noticed that people are not as compliant, I guess is the word to use. Okay. Whereas originally when we had the mask mandate here in the city, it was 100%. But now that we have this mix of vaccinated, unvaccinated, this information is doubly complex than it was. Right. I've noticed that this sort of participation in that is lesser than it was. So I even feel less safe, or less, or like I'm putting other people in more danger because of this. So I do think that is a big deal. And I do think that, unfortunately, we could see us going back to... I don't know how the theater industry is going to react. I don't think they want to shutter their doors again. I think it's going to be really hard for that to happen if it needs to happen again. So I don't think that's a non-factor. I do think that
absolutely. And I didn't mean to point out... I wasn't definitely trying to say that it was a non-factor. Yeah. I just thought if we took COVID out of it, I thought Suicide Squad also had some very compelling reasons.
100%. I just wanted to clarify that you didn't mean exactly that. You didn't mean that it didn't have any effect, just for these reasons aside.
For sure.
It's a complicated film.
But everything you just said, I completely agree with. And I think that we are in uncertain times. People are questioning their safety, and that's a completely valid point. But to your point, I would argue that the numbers on HBO Max should have been bigger then.
Do we know the numbers?
Did they give us the numbers?
We don't know the numbers, but we know that it was the second most watched in the opening weekend to Mortal Kombat. So
but we don't know what that means. Do we know what the Mortal Kombat numbers are?
Well, we know what it means.
Hang on. Do we know what the Mortal Kombat numbers are? Here's my point. What if it's 400 million people saw it and 401 million people saw Mortal Kombat? Like, that's a ridiculous number, but we don't know the number. Like, that's the...
Let me get the numbers while you guys are
Jake talks about it all the time of, if we don't know the number, then they're just kind of saying stuff. It's just...
And I'll say this too.
It's just noise.
And then we got to move on. Mortal Kombat came out right after Godzilla vs. Kong.
Yeah.
And of those two, Godzilla vs. Kong felt like the one that you were like, all right, I'm going to go to the theater to see this if at all possible, right? Like, I want to see that big. But Mortal Kombat, to me, because that's how I watched it, felt very much like, I can press play on HBO Max.
And to add to that, sorry, and we'll get to what you're going to mention, we've discussed this, but we have to remember that the things are changing and moving so fast that from those releases as being sort of a return in a sense of like, oh wow, there are really big, interesting movies happening, like a general audience movies happening, versus like we've been getting a lot of indie films and stuff that's just been thrown on home video and such. Like, those felt like, oh, the theater industry or the movie industry is kind of moving and a more general audience is paying attention to it. And then you go to a few weeks later and you have A Quiet Place, which is in a much different environment as far as where theaters are at. And that kept going. Like, these things are changing so much that comparing Mortal Kombat to what's going on now, the world is in a different place as far as the theater industry is concerned. So it's not even fair necessarily to compare.
You have numbers, Kev?
I think it's a completely fair comparison. And I'll tell you why. So when Mortal Kombat launched, to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mortal Kombat had a theatrical and an HBO Max, or just HBO Max?
No, theatrical too.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So when Mortal Kombat launched, I'm going to read the headline from Deadline here. This is from Deadline. The Suicide Squad HBO Max
probably a reduced theatrical, because I think maybe like Regal was closed and stuff like that.
There weren't. Yeah, we only Black Widow, I think, was the first release that had like a 4,000 plus theater release, like where we were finally in like the late 3,000 sort of theaters that were even open to participate.
But my argument here would be this. Everything that Gabe just explained as to why people may have tuned in to Suicide Squad at home, in my opinion, would have boosted the HBO Max numbers. Because if the Suicide Squad was a movie that people actually really wanted to see, and I want to clarify, we all like this film. This is not coming from a negative place. We're all just trying to figure out why it didn't do well. I would argue that based on everything Gabe just said, that Suicide Squad on HBO Max should have been an astounding number. And if it had done less as what it did in theaters. So I'm going to read this from Deadline. The Suicide Squad HBO Max weekend viewership was off 26% from Mortal Kombat in Samba TV US households. Now listen to this. Third-party streaming analysts, they say this, that there was 2.8 million US households that tuned into the film from the Friday to Sunday frame. 3.8 million households tuned into Mortal Kombat in that same time frame. So my point is, Mortal Kombat, I would argue, didn't... I would say Suicide Squad was a bigger film than Mortal Kombat. Would you guys agree with me on that? It should have been a bigger film than Mortal Kombat. Course. Yeah. So if Mortal Kombat did 3.8 million households in its first weekend, and Squad had all these things factored into it in terms of COVID, people being worried to go to the theaters, and did 1 million less households.
But here's the thing.
What does that tell you?
But here's the thing about these numbers. We don't have anything to gauge these numbers on, because this is not a fair way to put this, because it's there's too many variables. Why is it not fair? Let me explain. There's too many variables here to decide, because at home there's so much more to pulls people's attention. To go to the theater, you have to leave your house, you have to spend the money, this, that, and the other. Those are the barricades you have to make yourself through in order to get someone to sit down in person. At home, it's much easier, but also there's YouTube, there's video games, there's books, there's TV. There's so much more that you can just simply flip to that you can do at home.
So why didn't it do better at home?
Hang on. Let me can I finish my point? Let me finish my point. So I think those variables are so different. It's hard to say that this is fair, but that 2.8 million people that tuned in, households that tuned in. So that's more than one person, but just saying one person per. If they went and bought a $15 ticket, you add $42 million to the box office. Okay. That's then almost a $70 million box office. We're not talking about it being a failure. That's my point. So sure, it's less than Mortal Kombat, but like we don't have a gauge of is that a success or not. And that's the problem with using those numbers that they decide to provide, or that a third party that we can't verify.
that if people weren't going to go to the theater to see it based on the factors that you mentioned in terms of COVID and questions about what the film was, to press play at home would have been so much easier. I think it should have been bigger.
But again, it's not easier because there are more distractions. They are competing with more things.
Hold on, and we are also kind of overlooking the bigger point, which is just that some people are tired of DC.
Sure.
Like some people don't
100%.
really like the DC movies. You know, there's a lot of people who love the Snyder stuff that won't support any of the DC stuff. There's people who didn't like Birds of Prey and they thought Wonder Woman 1984 was weak.
Again, that's why I say I think there's too many variables for us to say no one cared. There's too much going on, too many things that we could pull from, and these numbers that we're getting from a third party that we can't verify, that Warner Brothers refuses to verify, or Netflix refuses, whoever it is, the streamer is, pulling a conclusion from that I think is too simple.
But the big takeaway is that we all thought that movie should have done better domestically.
It's a great movie. I haven't mentioned in the podcast. I loved it. And I think that this is the second film that DC has put out where I said, wow, we have never really gotten a superhero movie that was like this. Like, we've never really gotten a superhero movie that was allowed to be a filmmaker's movie. This doesn't feel like it was trying to appease all four quadrants. It felt like James Gunn was just following his instinct. It felt like Zack Snyder was following his instinct, and people don't like it for whatever reasons, but that's what makes it interesting, is that it's specific. So I loved it. I had a great time with it. To talk about the quality of the film, people should watch it. If you didn't watch it, it's available at home.
I liked it.
You should watch it. It's fantastic.
John Cena's a sick bastard.
He's ridiculous.
He's the best part of the whole movie. Those tighty whities.
His best performance.
Yeah, I think so.
His best performance I've ever seen.
Agree with you,
I never really believed him in anything, and he was great.
How great was Polka Dot Man too?
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, he's great. He's
with David Dalsmachian. I think that James Gunn did a great job in terms of finding, because like what Cena did in Trainwreck with Apatow was, I think, really where they finally they tapped into his comedic side. I mean, obviously he was funny in terms of wrestling, but Gunn found a way to make him badass and funny in a perfect combination. Cena, I think it's definitely Cena's best performance as well. I agree.
All right, let's get to this week in movies, and not ironically, we're going to start with two movies that are going to streaming. And one is called CODA, which is opening in limited release, but it's also going to be available via your Apple TV Plus segment. This is something that I learned due to our premium episode, because Jake used this film as one of his 3 most favorite films that he's seen so far this year, and CODA stands for the Children of Deaf Adults. And I did not know that. I knew that the movie was about the one member of a family who could hear in a deaf family. And so if you want to hear his take on it, seek out our premium episode, but know that he recommends it highly and says that people should definitely see this. It was a Sundance film that I know that came out of the festival back in January with a ton of great reviews. And so it's going to be available on Apple TV.
Broke the record, which we discussed a little bit.
Yep, that's on my to-do list this weekend. In addition to Nicolas Cage's Pig, which I really want to see. Beckett is opening on Netflix, and this is John David Washington's film with Alicia Vikander. And we had the director Ferdy on our show, I think it was last week on the main show, where he breaks down his filmmaking process. I liked Beckett. I thought it was really good. I thought it was well made. I think John David Washington is an absolute star. I think that he is proving he can carry just about any type of film. And I think people are going to keep experimenting with him and stretch the range of his talents. But even looking at just his filmography up to this point, when you do BlacKkKlansman, Malcolm and Marie, Tenet, Beckett, like, he's believable in all of these projects. I just think he's, granted, it's in his genes basically at this point.
Yeah. He's funny enough. He's become like so quickly like a staple of Real Blend. He's been on the show twice. And we've covered, I think, since BlacKkKlansman, everything he's been in. Like, we've covered in the sense of we've been very enthusiastic about his projects. Everything since then. So he's
a great guest, by the way.
Fantastic.
If you haven't heard that interview for Malcolm and Marie, that's the one I would listen to.
That one's great.
Obviously, the one with Christopher Nolan.
The Tenet one is good because obviously obviously Nolan takes a lot of that interview. It was a small amount of time, and so a lot of John David's participation is him sort of reacting to Nolan and kind of playing along. So that was a fun one in particular.
There was a comment underneath that on YouTube, and it was like, interview both your guests
Well, this is why we say that Nolan is still a white whale of sorts, not because he was with somebody. Parrot is fine, but we only had like 15 minutes with him, right? With two people, and it's like we asked 3 questions, and we do a bit about Dunkirk, and
we got him to say Dunkirk, which is really that was the goal.
Sorry, Beckett, continue on Beckett.
Well, I want to jump ahead actually because the other 3 movies deserve a ton of time, and Kev, I want you to get into Free Guy. Because if you heard the premium episode, you will know that Free Guy currently is Kevin's favorite movie of the year. And so I want to give you plenty of time to explain why.
Well, I just love the film, and I thought Shawn Levy did a phenomenal job capturing an emotion that I needed to see in the theaters. It was just the idea of appreciating your life. And this is not a theme that we haven't seen in films before, but it was just the way it was executed. The filmmaking behind this film in terms of just the visual effects are incredible, and Ryan Reynolds is amazing in this. But shout out to a lot of his co-stars who are also amazing. Lil Rel Howery, who's one of my favorite actors working right now. He's such a great actor. I loved him in Get Out. He's great in this. Taika Waititi's great in this. Jodie Comer, I'm now a fan of hers. I haven't seen Killing Eve, but I was obsessed with her in this film, and I can't wait to see what she does with Ridley Scott Scott in The Last Duel. I
think I saw she was on a short list, and maybe a fan-made short list, I don't know, but I thought she was in discussions to be the next Doctor on Doctor Who. Like people
wow.
Oh.
That's wild.
That would be interesting. Now, that would be a good choice. I mean, she commands
a new Doctor
very...
starting next year, from what I understand.
Yeah. She's an amazing actor, and she's great in Free Guy. And I'll just say this film has one of my favorite lines of dialogue I've heard in a long time. It's a line that I think is going to stay with me for a very long time. And it's just it's a film that made me feel good, man. And I'm not saying that, like, emotionally when you walk out of a film like that, I was walking differently. I felt better about life when I walked out of that theater. And it was I needed that. And we talk about headspace a lot and kind of where we are in terms of headspace when we sit down for a film. I still haven't reviewed Green Knight because when I saw it, I didn't feel like I was in a good headspace for that type of film. I'm gonna be watching it. We mentioned this on Premium, and we'll plug it here. On August 18th, A24 is going to be doing a one night only screening of that film at home. So you can go to A24's Twitter or my Twitter or whatever to find more details on that. I will definitely be revisiting the film that night, particularly just to get my thoughts. But in terms of headspace, when I saw Free Guy, I just gotten off a stressful day at work, and I got into the theater, sat down, got a popcorn, and just enjoyed it. It was. I just loved it. I loved every second of it. It was well paced. Reynolds is fantastic. It's my favorite movie of the year right now. I would imagine that will change at some point because we have so many films coming out the rest of the year that I'm very much excited to see, including Dune. But yeah, I love this film, and I hope people see it. I am a little worried about the box office, though. And I think it's a very tough sell. Yeah. I don't know if this film... It's hard to explain this movie to people.
Well, and a lot of people think it already came out, too, is a problem.
They do.
It's been marketed.
I also don't think that the trailers have been a lot of people have been telling me they didn't love the trailers. So they were surprised that the reviews for the film were so good.
Interesting.
And I think that comes from so I'm just interested to see how well it's going to do. I mean, Reynolds is a big star, but we've talked about this in the show a bunch of times. These actors aren't bringing in people to the theaters anymore.
Let me make an argument for Reynolds in this sense. I think he's very much in control of his marketing. I think he has a hand in it for sure. And he's recycled something that works well for him, but it's him and a very catchy 90s pop tune. He does it for Hitman's Bodyguard with a Britney Spears song. Obviously, it was a driving point for Deadpool. Here it's Mariah Carey. And, it works for him, but I do wonder if audiences keep seeing that kind of bit used and think that it's like, oh, I've seen this, and it's weird because Free Guy is really creative. It's overwhelmingly imaginative, almost, in the fact that it has this open world game that players step into. It's very much a take on Fortnite, which is a game that my boys played for a long time, to the point where there are professional Fortnite players who basically play themselves and comment on the game. That opening segment, Kev, that oneer, where you are skydiving in. That's how you start every Fortnite mission. Like you jump off of a bus and you take a hang glider into the world and you kind of land.
It's immersive. It's a great tool for storytelling. Like the way Shawn opens this film is amazing.
And I'm gonna second how much I love Jodie Comer in it, because for the chunk of it, she's playing this really headstrong character in the game. And one thing that Shawn Levy does that's really, really smart is that he'll just like randomly cut out to whoever is playing the person, out in the real world.
Right.
And it's like a kid or some loser who's living at home in his mom's basement kind of thing. And it's really funny. It's very funny. And when you meet Jodie Comer's character in real life, she gets to play something totally different. And I think that she was incredible in both of them. So I liked it a lot. I think it's really creative. I like Ryan Reynolds in this, obviously. I think Reynolds has his type of humor, and he knows his lane right now, and he's absolutely staying in it. He gets a lot of fun out of being the naive bank teller character. And but as it evolves, like there's some really funny bits in the third act. Yeah. Some real big cameos that you don't expect. Yeah. That I, obviously want to protect. And I just go and have fun with it. But there's definitely some deeper elements, emotional elements that I'm really happy Kevin connected with. They didn't hit me quite as much, but I love the fact that they connected with you. So I think that's
it was just the moment. I just needed it, really, to be honest with you. It was great. So
let's switch gears completely to Don't Breathe 2 because this is not a feel-good movie by any sense of the word. And I think I liked this a lot more than you did, Kev. Did you like it?
I would argue that I really liked the first one.
Yeah.
This one is a little step below, but I still enjoyed it. It's just a really... I texted you afterwards, and this is a headspace thing. It's such a brutal film. And the older I get, and maybe I don't know what this says about me, I'm 37 now. I some of that stuff that like Saw, hostile, disturbing, just absolute like grotesque, brutal, gory stuff, just for the sake of being gory. Mm-hmm. It's not my thing. But I also have, as a film reviewer, I have to sit back and watch it objectively and talk about it from a review. Is it a good film? Does it work in the genre? Is it good for audiences? I'm just at a point where I find these types of films to be a little hard to watch, to be honest with you. It's a really brutal experience, and I don't know that I'll ever watch it again. But it's very well made. Stephen Lang is incredible. As you heard in our interview, the contact lenses that he wears, he doesn't even know where his marks are. It's pretty wild how they make this movie. And there's, one of the things that Shawn, I think you brought up in the interview, which I think was a really fascinating discussion, is this idea of this moral push-pull with Steven's character and kind of like how we go back and forth. I think Jake was talking about this as well. Mm-hmm. We're like, 1 minute we think that he's a good person, next minute we think he's a bad person, and the narrative kind of shifts that for us as we watch it. But there's a lot to be said about this film from a filmmaking perspective. There's an amazing wonder that happens in the house early on when the guys break in. So it's hard to talk about a film like this because I think it's well made, but it's just so brutal that I have a hard time recommending it. And it's really hard to watch.
I'm normally of that mindset with you. Like, I don't like that type of horror at all. And to the flip side, Brendan asked to watch something scary just this past week. Like, he's starting to get into horror movies. He's 13 years old now. And he said, I want to watch Friday the 13th. And I was like, all right, but I'm not going to show you the first one because it's kind of boring. And, even the second one's kind of cheesy.
Isn't there one death in the first one?
Yeah, at most. And then it turns out like the killer is his mom. But when he wants to see Friday the 13th, he knows he wants to see Jason. So we jumped ahead to number 4, right? And then I forget about, and maybe this is like Puritan too, but like there's so much sex and nudity in the Friday the 13th movies. Yeah. Like every scene is like 2 other people going upstairs to like screw in the shower.
It's more about camp counselors having sex than camp counselors getting murdered.
Much is. So every chapter I was like, let's jump ahead. Well, let's jump ahead. Yeah. And he goes, I've only seen half the movie.
And you're like, well.
But you know what? Psychologically, it's really fascinating. And my parents did the same thing. They would let me watch all the violence
Yeah.
But the sex they would skip. I remember seeing True Lies next to my parents, and they were like, "You can watch all the violence you want, but when Jamie Lee Curtis is dancing, we're covering your eyes." I'm like,
it's a oddity of American culture. I was the same way.
I do understand that.
And honestly, for real, like I don't believe in it, but in the moment, I was fast forwarding.
It's ingrained in us. It's ingrained in us. It's like, no, this is not. You can watch the guy get his head cut off.
Yes,
you can't watch anyone have sex.
No, there's a moment where Jason is on a slab at the morgue, and people assume that he's dead. Of course, he's not. And he picks up a saw and he digs it into the guy's head and cuts through enough that then he can turn the guy's head completely around. God. And of course, all of us are like, "Oh yeah!" And then,
that's awesome.
But see, that type of violence in those movies, that's different than the violence in Don't Breathe. Like I would argue that when you're watching the violence in the Friday the 13th film, it's almost like a sport. It's like, it's fun to watch Jason kind of playing around in this world. And I'm not saying watching people get murdered in movies is fun.
No, but in those types of movies, they kind of, it's played for over the top.
Yes, but when you watch Don't Breathe, it's so. I mean, we get into the interview with the filmmakers on our bonus episode about the turkey baster from the first movie, which is still horrifying to me. But the violence in Don't Breathe is it's such on a different level than the Friday the 13th.
I'll give you one example that's not spoilery. There's a guy in Don't Breathe who gets his mouth and nostrils. Don't Breathe 2.
Okay.
Who gets his mouth and nostrils covered in crazy glue. And it's super uncomfortable. Yeah. And they figure out a way to give him a breathing hole. And it's not through the mouth, but it's over the top. It's really it's super aggressive.
I haven't seen Don't Breathe 2 yet, but that's the fun, and the filmmakers kind of got into this. That's the fun of horror. Horror is a genre that has its own sort of like goalpost that keeps moving. Or bar that keeps getting raised, and that's like a part of if you're a horror fan, a fun of the horror is like, what's creatively, the creative sort of crux of a lot of horror or aspects of a specific horror film is, what's one way we can fuck with somebody, like fuck with the audience and like mess up our cast that is new or that is different
turkey
or is an
baster.
homage. Exactly. Like, it's like, what's a way that is new and different that is going to give that feeling, that horror feeling. And that's like a whole sort of creativity that only horror kind of has with its fans.
The ballerina in Suspiria, I will not forget. Oof, because we sat down to watch that on a Sunday morning eating breakfast, and it was a mistake. It was a huge mistake.
One thing I do want to clarify, and I think this is important to clarify, in terms of horror, I'm okay with if the violence serves a story. And like, to me, like grotesque and brutal violence, if it serves the story in a way that makes the story more interesting, that I'm cool with. The problem I have is the torture porn aspect of horror. And that aspect of where it came out of Saw and came out of Hostel. I am not against horror violence. One of my favorite movies of all time is Evil Dead 2, and that movie is brutal, but it's also done in a very fun way. Yeah. Anything that serves story, I'm cool with.
Yep.
But when you, like, Gabe's point just now is very interesting. There's a question you could ask yourself when you watch any violent scene in a horror film. Is this being done to shock me, or is this being done as a story purpose that also shocks me?
I promise we'll move on after this. Let me give an example. And I was sitting next to Kevin while this example happened. David Gordon Green's Halloween. There's a moment when Mike Myers is walking through the house. Later in the movie, he's in suburbia and he's walking through the house. And you hear a baby crying, and he walks into the room. And in the moment, I think I yelled out, and I was like, "Oh God, no!" Because the story is telling you that he's going to hurt this baby. Yeah, he's going to kill this baby. The baby's crying. Why else are you telling me that a baby's crying if he's not going to kill the baby? And then he doesn't, But the fear of that. The fear of that even being a possibility was more scary than any of the kills in the movie.
And in order to get that fear, you have to see him rip a guy's face off, minute 20 of the movie. That all serves that moment.
To Kevin's last thing I'll say about this, Seven is the example I always go to. Fincher's Seven. That is one of the most brutal films I've ever seen in my entire life, but you don't see hardly any of the violence. It's all aftermath. It's all dialogue. Like the scene when the guy is recollecting lust is, to me, one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in a film. But Fincher does it in a weird way. I use this word lightly, tastefully. Yeah. And I say that because it's almost worse what he does, because you are then envisioning the imagery, but it's all story driven. Like the way that scene is designed is completely story driven, and it is shocking, but it serves the story. And I think that there's a case to be made about brutal and nasty serving story versus just shocking.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of taste and approach, and that's kind of the fun of it. Like they're artists at the end of it. Like True. Is your artistry wanting to push forward sort of like the special effects of it and sort of how much you can show on screen and how much, when you're discussing with the actual regulation boards of like how many frames can you literally keep of this bashed face, like that there's an art to like, I want this to be real, I want this to be whatever, versus, I just rewatched Guy Ritchie's first couple films, and he's the kind of guy who's like, I'm going to throw a big knife into somebody and I'm going to cut right before it gets there to someone's reaction. Right. And you do the same thing that the person did, even though you didn't see it. It's just a different approach, and it's a different, I enjoy them both for their own reasons, but that's the beauty of film.
All right, let's shift gears yet again to the Aretha Franklin biopic. Respect. So we're all over the place in This Week in Movies, but that goes to show the exciting things that are coming to theaters. I haven't seen it. How's all the gore in Respect? Yeah. Vicious. That Aretha Franklin was.
She does murder. Every
time she sings, people's heads explode. Literally.
Exactly. I was going to bring this up earlier in the show, but I decided to wait till here because we were discussing whether certain films warrant going to see them in a theater, or if you're comfortable watching them at home. And some things that sort of naturally a superhero movie or some type of effects-driven film would say, get yourself out to the theater. And Respect, to me, before I saw it, felt like the kind of movie of like, well, I could probably watch it on an award screener when it comes around later and still get the impact of what happens in the movie. But they booked it in a screening for us last night, and because of the fact that press screenings, are kind of limited lately, and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen to them moving forward, I go to all of them that they book in my market because I want them to keep doing it. And damn, am I glad that I went out to a theater to go see this, because the music and the sound and her voice is 90% of the film. I cannot say enough good things about her, I was going to say Jennifer Hudson. Thank you. In this role,
Jennifer
Lawrence.
We'd have a lot more to talk about if they cast Jennifer Lawrence.
Aretha Franklin.
We'd have some different topics.
She literally, Kevin said this, and I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit because I was like, it's like an actory thing. He said that she channels Aretha Franklin. And there
spiritually.
Yes, and there are scenes where you're 100% right. Like, she's just...
It's her.
It's her. It is her. And I mean, it's a credit to how good Jennifer Hudson is, how talented. She's just an overwhelming amount of talent. Like, she can sing anything. And it's hard. There was a hard disconnect because I kept appreciating her throughout the movie and saying, like, damn, she can sing anything. And then I had to remind myself, oh, but it's Aretha Franklin who really did this first, because she starts in jazz, and then she transitions to soul, which was driven a lot by gospel at that time. And she's singing standards, and then she's branching out. And Jennifer Hudson is going through all of these with pitch perfect accuracy. But then you have to remind yourself, oh, but she's doing a catalog of somebody who broke down all these barriers beforehand. And so my only beef with Respect, which I think is, I think it's a really good movie with an outstanding performance. I think that there's so much to Aretha Franklin's life that any 2.5 hour movie is going to have to go quickly over some bits that I want to learn more about. And this film even only really takes us up to 1972. So there's a huge chunk of her life that still doesn't get going, and it ends like over the credits. It shows a performance of hers from much later in her life, and you realize that she was still incredible, till the end. So listen, if you just want to go and appreciate the music and you want to see one of the strongest performances I've seen in a musical biopic in an extremely long time, I think that movie did this. There were a lot of really good supporting performances. It hits a lot of the same beats. She rises to the top, she falls, she has a descension. Basically, she pulls herself back up. But the way that it's structured and the fact that music is just like in the fabric of this movie, I think it's worth going out of your way to go see in a theater, because the music and the sound and her voice were off the charts unbelievable.
I couldn't agree with you more. It was the theatrical experience of this film was shockingly good. Like, shockingly good. Like, because it's live, right? Her singing and that music. There are moments. I want to shout out Mark Maron, who's great in this film too, because Maron's performance, his character is really interesting because he's like a de-escalating type of character, but he's so like in their face in terms of like getting in people's faces in terms of like the way he would operate in a meeting.
He plays a record executive who essentially signs her. Yeah. After
Right.
she had, do you know at that point she was on Columbia? She did 9 records with Columbia before she went to Mark Maron. And then at one point she gets a cake. She gets a cake and it says like happy 25th birthday. And I was like, you're only 25 at this point? You have 9 records out. So she was incredible.
But a shout out to Mark Maron, who's great in the film. Marlon Wayans is really good in the film. And what I was talking about in terms of de-escalation, Mark Maron, as you mentioned, is the record label. He's the head of the label, or is he one of the executives of the label? And he'll be in these meetings with artists, and there's a lot of drama that happens in these meetings. And he just, the way he would sit in those meetings and de-escalate conversations and kind of get Aretha to move forward in terms of what she was doing in Hudson's character. Every character was interesting, but the live recordings of the music were my favorite parts of the whole film. Like when they start really getting into like her doing these live recordings, or even sitting with her sisters and coming up with respect on the piano. It's just some really cool moments. And I think the live singing aspect of it really, really kind of like really goes home in terms of like making you want to see this in the theater, because it sounds amazing. When she's in Madison Square Garden singing Respect, it is, you feel like you're right there. And it's because of the filmmaking and the actual sound quality. Hudson is Aretha Franklin. I never saw Hudson on screen. It was her the whole time. Like that character. And shout out to the younger actress who plays young Aretha Franklin early on in the film, who has to carry a lot of the emotional weight until we meet Hudson. I think, 20 or 30 minutes in, maybe 20 minutes in.
Yes.
But she is outstanding. Everyone in this film. Forrest Whitaker, great performance.
Oh my God.
Everyone's
so
great in this. Whitaker's performance is it's a hard performance because he's such the character
he plays her father. He plays her father, who is essentially managing her career early on, and then they get at odds about what direction her career should go in. Essentially,
yeah, definitely.
I have a question before we move on, because we are running long.
Yes.
And this might be a record-breaking question on August 11th. So is she the front runner?
Yeah, listen, I know that is the immediate.
She deserves it.
Yeah,
right now.
She. I think here's what I'm even going to say. Because I don't even want to call something like Oscar nominated or Oscar. She gives an Oscar worthy performance, right? Like I think she belongs in the category. I would be very surprised if she doesn't get there, but it's super early because it's August.
Really early.
Oh, it's so early. But she is honestly.
Was this originally supposed to come out around Christmas time, or was that last year?
No, that sounds right. That does sound right. And the thing I want to talk about, but how it glances over some things, like there's some really important things in there about civil rights movement and work she did with Martin Luther King, and but the movie just doesn't have time to get to that. There's an actor who plays Martin Luther King in several scenes, and I think they do enough to make it important.
Yeah, they spent some good time with that. I thought
they do.
Yeah, because that becomes a whole centerpiece for her character arc, right?
Yes.
In terms of like what she wanted to do and give back and kind of help with everything that was going on.
Yeah.
I thought the Martin Luther King Jr. thing was actually a pretty prominent part of the film. Like that was a big through line, I thought.
Yeah, I guess I just mean like I think that there are other elements of her personal life that I wanted to be explored a little bit more. But I loved the songwriting aspects of it. All the stuff with the Muscle Shoals band was unbelievably great.
Right? That was with Mark Maron's scenes, right? Like those scenes were incredible. Like those, I wanted to sit in those recording sessions the whole movie. Like you actually felt like you were watching a real Aretha Franklin recording session. Like the way she navigates the room and tells the artists what to do with their instruments and knowing. I mean, she's so in the zone with that performance. It's her. I'm telling you, there is a spiritual element, and she was handpicked by Aretha Franklin. And her American Idol audition, the reason Jennifer Hudson is famous, her audition was Share Your Love With Me by Aretha Franklin.
That's awesome.
And it's a fascinating thing. I mean, think about 16 years later, she's playing her in a film handpicked by Aretha Franklin herself. I mean, that is one of the coolest journeys I've heard in terms of just like breaking out in Hollywood. What an amazing story.
A ton of movies that we recommend this week. Yeah. Free Guy and CODA and Respect and I even recommend Don't Breathe too, so get to the theaters. Blend game. We are playing in honor of Free Guy, Ryan Reynolds, hashtag Ryan Reynolds Blend. And Gabe, you never get to play these games, so why don't you kick us off?
Sure, I'll go quick. For me, people who have seen me film before, I'm a big, I go with nostalgia is usually my route to these. And so the film that I'm picking, I don't know when the last time I saw it. It's been years, and I've maybe only seen it 3 or 4 times. But because it establishes the sort of sense of humor of Ryan Reynolds, and for me, I love Ryan Reynolds, and mostly because I was at such a perfect age when he started becoming pretty prominent that his sense of humor is just has a big thumbprint on my sense of humor, and the kind of comedy I like or jokes I make or this, that, and the other comes from his perspective.
You're gonna love Free Guy.
Yeah, I'm excited. I watch anything he's in because I know he's gonna make it fun. Yeah. And even if he's good, he's a good action star too. So even some of his stuff that's not necessarily funny, I pretty much enjoy his stuff across the board. But I'm putting down Van Wilder as my pick because I think that there's something before that, but to me,
I thought you were going to go Just Friends. When you said nostalgia, I thought you were going Just Friends.
Just Friends is a huge one as well. I watched over and over again, but between Van Wilder and like Waiting, that just sort of established this is the comedian that Ryan Reynolds is, and pretty much everything since, in a great way, everything since has sort of been he has such a specific sense of humor and such a well executed sense of humor that it feels like every project since then they always go, how do we make these jokes better for Ryan? How do we make this funnier so that he can deliver it? And whether that's him pushing for that or just smart people letting him run with it, to me, the Van Wilder sort of established as a fan for me his sense of humor moving forward and why I've been such a fan. I couldn't tell you the last time I saw it. I should maybe rewatch it, but it's a good time.
There's a really that Van Wilder is one of my favorite bathroom blend.
You've discussed this. You discussed this. Yeah. That's right.
There's a moment. Oh my God, Tara Reid puts this like laxative in her boyfriend's shake, his protein shake, before he has a big test the next day or that day, and then he's sitting there taking the test and fills all the answers in and tries to run to the bathroom but doesn't make it, ends up finding a trash can, which is really it's amazing. I mean, I went Just Friends, and I think if we were doing best, I would have gone Deadpool.
Sure.
But Just Friends changed my life, actually. I mean, like, that movie is the reason why I'm here with you guys.
Oh, that was your first review, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the first film I ever reviewed.
That's awesome.
It was 2006 or 5. I think it was at that point. 2005, I think was the year. No, November 18th, 2005 is the day I reviewed that film. So it had to be 2005.
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. November 18th, 2005. So I was at George Mason University, and they were doing a word of mouth screening, and there's a cinema in that theater at George Mason University in a place called the Johnson Center. If anybody listening to this is in the DC area, I went to college there, and they had a cinema in the basement of this building called the Johnson Center, which is where all the food and everything was. So they did this word of mouth screening. I got my hand on a ticket, and I was like, I'm going to go to this. And I was an intern at the radio station, and the internship was happening through George Mason University. And one day there's a radio show there called The Sports Junkies, and they had Mr. Movie Phone was calling in to do movie reviews for them. I'm like, oh, I would love to do movie reviews for a living. Could you imagine how cool that would be? and I somehow got my hands on a ticket to see Just Friends at George Mason, and I used that as my way to go on their show to review a film for them. And I loved Just Friends, like, you know, the all for one I swear moment with the braces, and it's just iconic, that film. And so, but for me, it was personally a big deal because I saw it and then I reviewed it, and the Junkies let me stay on their show, and now I'm doing what I'm doing now with you guys. But so that film has a special place in my career. On top of that, you know, it's just a really funny film. Like, it's extremely clever. Ryan Reynolds is amazing in it. Amy Smart, who I used to love, obviously, from Road Trip, she's amazing in the film. Chris Klein from American Pie, really funny in the movie as well. It's you know, and Anna Faris. I mean, Anna Faris, I was rewatching Scary Movie the other day. Anna Faris was one of the funniest. She still is, but at that time, that 90s Anna Faris.
Yep.
There was no one like her. There was no one like her.
No.
Yeah.
No, and Just Friends was, you know, aside from the personal reason why I love that film in general. It's one of my favorite Christmas movies ever. It's such a great Christmas film, and it's just really funny and heartwarming, and it deals a lot with bullying and high school and how we are in high school and who we become later in life. And it was just an interesting idea of this Just Friends zone, which is something we all can relate to. And, you know, to me, it just works. And, you know, I think Reynolds, that's one of my favorite movies ever. And it's also my favorite Ryan Reynolds movie, just period.
Very nice. Before I go, I want to shout out just like a couple of things that build up to him, because my pick is Deadpool 2. And I'll tell you why.
Great pick.
I think that Ryan Reynolds automatically just gets associated with Deadpool now, but like, I'm so glad you guys picked non-Deadpool movies, because he's been in so many great things aside from this. His cameo in Harold and Kumar, it is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life.
It is really good.
It is screamingly funny. He did a couple of movies in 2008 and 2009 that I think showed his other side, where he's breaking away from being the sarcastic guy. He played a dad in Definitely Maybe, which is actually
Definitely Maybe is great. Like,
it is.
That is, and then Definitely Maybe, and then The Proposal.
The Proposal is really good too. But I was going with Adventureland. He played a person working the park at Adventureland. These are all great performances by him that are not traditional Ryan Reynolds films.
Yeah.
But I think when we, you know, this is the morbid way to say it, but like, you talk about when you write someone's obituary, what's going to be in the first couple of sentences. Like, Ryan Reynolds, star of Deadpool franchise, is going to be, you know, that's what he'll be associated with forever. And I just like Deadpool 2 more than the first movie. Maybe that's unusual, but
I don't know. I don't think so. I think the first one felt like such a, it had such like an indie vibe to it. Like, they were making it for such little money, and they were like really pushing for it.
Yes.
That Deadpool 2, they really got to bring out all the guns, literally and figuratively.
That's how I feel. I feel like that was the movie they made with the vote of confidence.
Too. Yes,
and it is just joke after joke after joke after joke. Like, it is hysterical. It's hysterical, and so
Brolin is so good in that.
Oh my God, everyone's great in it. Julian Dennison's really, really funny. The Juggernaut surprise was unbelievably great. It's just, all of it's so funny. So I went with, I know that Deadpool is my favorite role of his, and I went with Deadpool 2 because that is the better one. So yeah,
it's funny, we talk about Jennifer Hudson being born to play Aretha Franklin. I mean, Ryan Reynolds was born to play Deadpool. That's like, there's not really a comedic action star actor that can do that tone, which is very much the tone of the comics. Like, it feels. And he was born to play that.
Very, you know, we lump a lot of praise, and rightfully so, on Hugh Jackman and his interpretation of Wolverine.
Sure. But
I'd almost argue that his interpretation of Deadpool is right there. Like, they're right on line.
100%.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. Those two are like two of the most perfect casting moments ever. Like, in terms of, in general, not just.
And it'll never
films.
happen. Like, but I like, for so many meta reasons, I really wish they got to do a movie together. You know, because they're constantly jabbing at each other in public, and I just think.
I could see them doing a movie together. Maybe not as Wolverine and Deadpool.
Okay.
But I could see them doing something.
Oh, please! I hope they do something.
Who wouldn't show up for that?
Oh my God! Yeah. I know all of us would. Okay, so Cam
speaking
McKinney.
Of coincidences,
we have Jake's answer we have to get to before we get to audience picks.
God, why do we have to throw it at Jake Hamilton? So Jake is, let me explain where he is. Jake is in Iowa right now, and he is covering, Major League Baseball is doing a game between the White Sox and the Yankees, I believe.
Sure.
And it's at the Field of Dreams Cornfield Baseball Stadium. And so Jake lied to his producers, essentially, and said, it's important for me to be there.
They made a movie about this place.
Yes. And finagled his way into this assignment. So he's out there enjoying covering a baseball game. And he made a pick. So here's Jake Hamilton with his Ryan Reynolds pick.
Hey, what's up, boys? Sorry I was not able to be a part of the show this week. As you can tell, I'm here in heaven, aka Dyersville, Iowa, at the iconic Field of Dreams. But I had to contribute to this week's Real Blend game. Ryan Reynolds blend, easy pick for me. It's the first Deadpool. I mean, I associate him and that character so much. I don't think anyone could have brought him to life like he does. It's a perfect blend of a performance. It's a perfect blend of a character and an actor going well together. It's a perfect blend of an actor knowing a character so well that he's able to sort of inhabit him in a three-dimensional way where you see the performance and you think, there's almost quite literally no one else who could have ever done that. It's a brilliant performance on his part. He absolutely matches it. And it's a movie that not only was made better by him being in it, I'm not sure it has any reason to exist if he didn't. So, miss you guys, love you guys, I'll see you next week.
In addition to Jake's pick, we had Cam McKinney, who went with Mississippi Grind. Harry Lichtman, John Palmer, and many others said Deadpool. Christian went with Life. Jackson said The Proposal, and I saw a bunch of people put Buried on there as well, too, which is, again...
Oh!
Yeah.
Buried is legit. Like that. The entire film takes place in the coffin, right?
Yes. It's like a quick 90 minutes, but damn, is it effective.
This is such a random side note, but I just, because I genuinely do have ADD, so my brain does go all over the place. What's an underrated film, has nothing to do with Ryan Reynolds, but Buried reminded me of it, is Locke. Did you ever see Locke with Tom Hardy?
Where he's
in the car the
just
whole
driving
movie?
The car? Yeah.
I love that film. I don't know why that hit my mind when you mentioned Buried, but I was thinking about actors in
I love single location, tight single
Yeah.
location films. It's there's so much creative stuff that people do with those kind of movies.
But Kev, do you know
Locke is amazing.
Do you know Ryan Reynolds' favorite Tom Cruise movie though?
Oh, I'm so excited about this. Wait, hold on. His favorite Tom Cruise movie. Is it? Can you give me a hint? Is it recent or early on?
It's like mid career for Cruise, not recent.
Okay.
But Reynolds, I know every time I talk to him, he always brings up how much he loves this Tom Cruise movie.
He
time.
loves this Tom.
He mentions it
every single time.
Every time we talk, he mentions it. Yep.
I don't know, Sean. Do you mind giving me the answer?
It's Buried Maguire.
Oh my god.
That's good. Buried Maguire. That's pretty damn good.
Thank you very much.
I want to know how you got there. Like, how did you get to that joke? Like, from Buried?
Here's how I do it. Yeah, if anyone mentions something, I'll try to immediately think of what it rhymes with. And for some reason, Barry rhymed with Jerry.
What's the big line from Buried, Maguire? Show me the coffin.
Show me the
coffin.
All right, reviews. You can send us a review at realblend@cinemablend.com. Oh, I didn't mention next week's blend game.
Yes.
It is hashtag Rebecca Hall blend. Rebecca Hall has a movie coming out called The Night House. She has had a tremendous career up until this point, and we're going to celebrate the films of Rebecca Hall. So play hashtag Rebecca Hall blend on social media or email us at realblend@cinemablend.com. That is where John Augustine has written us a review for this week's episode, and he writes, Dear Sean, Jake, Kevin, and Gabe, I love listening to the Real Blend podcast. You guys are real film fans. Sometimes I get the sense that a lot of other film critics don't actually like to watch films. Yes, that is an unusual bit about people in this industry, is you get the impression that they don't kind of like going to movies. Every week, I look forward to when the podcast will be dropping. It has become one of the best parts of my week. I first discovered the Real Blend podcast when I was stumbling through YouTube and came across Sean's Snyder videos for Cinema Blend. A big DC Snyder fan myself, I was really intrigued by these videos, and I came away wanting more content like that, and I found Real Blend. I really enjoy how much fun you guys have together, every single week. It really makes me laugh and think about the films I'm watching. It's fun to see the hot takes and debates over the films you all love. I recently came across Jake's interviews with the Suicide Squad cast. I thought they were hilarious, and I burst out laughing. Jake asked such great questions. Oh, we should have edited this part out. I noticed on Twitter, he posted about getting angry messages over his interview. I responded to that post just saying that I thought the interviews were great, to offer a small token of gratitude over the slew of negativity on the internet. Jake retweeted my response, and I couldn't believe it. I thought it was all so cool. I had to take a screenshot so that I could tell everyone that one of the guys on Real Blend retweeted me. That made my day, so thank you. Not only am I entertained, but I always gain new perspective from each of you. Shawn, I love the efforts you've made in writing the book about the Snyder Cut and the insights you have. In such a time of people being so divided over fictional characters, it's cool. Fictional characters. Yeah, I'd say like Affleck every single time. It's cool to see a Marvel guy supporting DC. And Kevin, I've learned so much from you about film. Now, every time I watch a movie, I wonder how it was filmed. You also convinced me to watch Tenet. Thanks for all the interesting conversations. Keep doing what you've been doing. All of my best.
That's awesome.
John Augustine. Thank you, John, so much for taking the time to write that letter to us. And we are
Appreciate it, John.
So glad.
Kevin actually gave me extra work. He made him watch Tenet, and then he sent this email backwards. So I had to go in and I had to reorder all the stuff for Shawn.
Inverted email.
Yeah. Our next premium episode, it's going to post shortly. It's our favorite films of the year so far. Yeah, Monday. Monday is when you can get the premium. So remember to go to realblend.com /realblend premium. Let me do that again. cinemablend.com /realblend premium, and you can figure out how to sign up for our premium service, which gets you ad-free listening, 2 newsletters, including one coming this week, and the shows that drop on Monday. So in between, follow us on social media, because we do things like the weekly poll. We are constantly commenting on things that happen in the world of film, and so in between each of the episodes you're listening to, you're going to want to keep up to date with what we're doing. At Jake's Takes, probably find some pictures from his Field of Dreams trip. At Kevin McCarthy TV, you'll probably see some political commentary. At Sean_O'Connell, you'll see Snyder Cut people yelling at me. At Gabe Kovac. Gabe, what do you put on your social media?
I should tweet more. I'll be tweeting along with our watch party viewing of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That's a good plug. Monday, August 30th. And then the show, of course, is at Real Blends. Make sure you give it a follow and then hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. So until next week,
Hubie!
No, wrong show.
Hubie!
Oh, it's a Spielberg one? It's a Spielberg one?
Minority Report.
Wait, we did Spielberg?
The Adventures of Tintin.